Hi, good evening. I'm calling this council meeting to order on the evening of Thursday, March 16th at 7:32. And with that, we will start with the weather.
Yes.
Which couldn't have been better today. I spent a lot of time at the park just now with the
It's a good
kids.
place for me.
You just wherever you'd like to be.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. It was a beautiful day in the neighborhood today. The humidity at 3 p.m. this afternoon was a dry 12%. Now, how often does that happen around here? Of course, that's also setting the stage for you get some gusty winds in here like we had the last couple of days for the spread of wildfires and brush fires.
Mm.
So any outside burning is strongly discouraged, which doesn't so much go on here in the immediate area, but in the environs it does. And now, it looks like we may get some showers tomorrow, but it's gonna get much cooler again over the weekend. When I say cooler, 50s on, low 50s on Saturday is actually just a bit below normal, because our average high temperatures right now are up in the mid to upper 50s. And then on Sunday, it's only going to be in the mid 40s and a bit breezy. So Sunday's going to be quite cool. But at this time of the year, you've got the sun angle warming things up very nicely. And going into pretty much most of next week, it's going to stay dry. This has been a very dry winter. All the precipitation, all the bad weather has been west of the Appalachian Mountains down into the southern part of the United States, the southern plains states, all the way out into California. And then with tons of snow, as you know, in the northern plains, the Midwest, and in Buffalo. That's where, and in New England, they got a big storm in upstate New York, the Hudson Valley. 2 feet of snow up there, whereas in New York, down in the southeastern part of New York, only had a minimal amount. I don't even think they had an inch of snow. But we've been in a snow drought here, a snow shadow, and I know the kids have them like that and want to get off from school. But we've only had like 4/10 of an inch of snow here for the entire winter. Now watch it snow 10 inches on April Fool's Day. Anyway, dry weather conditions to continue until further notice right into the spring. And we do need precipitation. We do need rainfall for agricultural purposes. So that's your update on the weather. And I'll be back up again for the community engagement.
Good, thank you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna flip this real briefly here just to have Doug Lohmeyer start with the building administrator's report, and then we'll go to resident comments, just so Doug can move on with his life once he's done. Doug, if you want to unmute yourself, unless you're ready.
All right, good evening. At 3506 Bradley Lane, that project is under construction. The permit was expiring a week or so ago, so we've extended the permit until May 31st. I think it'll be done by then. At 3417 and 3419 Cummings, they have an application in to demolish the existing house and construct 2 new houses on 2 separate lots. We held the residents information meeting on Tuesday night, and no major concerns, mostly on parking and noise, but it was a short meeting. We did get an application submitted for 203 Oxford Street. You're going to be making an addition at the rear of the house. We're reviewing the plans now, and they've submitted to the county. At 120 Quincy Street, their permit expired also, so their permit's been extended until June 30th. Looks like they're wrapping up. Most of the work is going to be interior. And at 155 Quincy Street, the homeowners submitted an application to remove the existing deck and construct a new deck, a screen porch, and also a generator. The village issued that permit on March 8th. And we still got a couple projects that are being planned, but they haven't submitted anything to the county or the village yet, so we haven't seen any plans. And that concludes my report.
Doug, a question.
we've heard from a resident living next door to 3500 Raymond Street. I presume that the plans and the existing work on that meets all the building code requirements. That was a question, does it?
According to the architect, they haven't changed the shape or the height of the roof. All they've done was replace the old trusses and beams and replacing the shingles to match the new roof. But the architect says they haven't changed any of the dimensions of the roof on the old existing house.
Okay, and have they enclosed a formerly open area as far as you know?
No.
Okay,
Well, there's an addition to the back of the house.
Well, yeah, they're
that's-
doing that, but not on the old
And
house.
we did order a wall check to confirm the setback requirements have been met, and they have.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Well-
Before we go to resident comments, just to kind of game out the evening here. We had an hour and 45 minutes of an ethics listening session. So folks that attended had the opportunity to speak on this proposed ordinance. So I would ask that resident comments right now are going to be focused on other items that are not related, because we will provide opportunity to speak during that session of the evening on the ethics ordinance. Okay, so I would really ask that we do that, because it's just going to be a lot of redundant comments, and let's just save that for the actual part of the meeting where we will be discussing the ethics ordinance. Nancy, you reached out to me, unclear what you wanted to talk about, but I'm going to call on you first. And then folks, if you want to raise your hands electronically, or if you're on camera, that we can call on you, and I'll call on you in the order that hands are raised.
Andrew, can you move that speaker a little?
Yeah.
It doesn't reach. It
Yeah,
doesn't
oh,
reach.
it doesn't, oh, that's as far as it goes?
Yeah.
It can hear you just
They can
fine.
hear.
I want to hear it,
You want me to turn it up?
Okay,
okay.
all right, you can, we're gonna ask you to unmute yourself. Michael will give you that option. There you go. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I'm Nancy Ferris. I live at 106 Quincy Street. My husband and I have lived there for 37 years. And for all that time, we've managed to keep our sidewalks clear no matter how much snow fell. This year, we were very grateful that not much snow, well, half an inch or whatever it was, fell. And that was all, because we can't do that anymore. If there's a significant snowfall, we're relying on our neighbors and wandering immigrant shovelers to get our sidewalks clean, and that makes us uncomfortable to be uncertain of how we'll get our sidewalks clean. We think it's important. For many years, we had dogs that we had to walk, whether it was snowy or not. And we also see the school kids go past our door all the time. So we really believe in keeping the sidewalks clear, but we can't do it ourselves. So I'm here to ask that the village do something about the requests that are coming from residents, and not only me, to arrange for somebody to clear sidewalks if there's a sizable snow. I've heard people say it's too expensive. Well, one thing you could do would be to limit the scope of the shoveling to just people who claim a disability or old age prevents them from shoveling. Another thing you could do would be to take bids and get the lowest bidder and see how that works. But now is the time to plan for it. We'd like to see it show up in the budget that's forthcoming. And we'd like to see the planning begin after we decide this. You decide the scope of the service. You'd need to get the manager to put out the matter for bids and proceed to make arrangements before fall and before snowfall. Now, as to the costs, the village has a huge reserve, and it really should be used for the benefit of those who live here. So I think this would be an excellent use of some of that money. I don't think it need be that expensive, but it's unlikely that we'll have another snow-free winter. And so I'd like to be sure that the village is preparing to help us out with our sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And we've had this ongoing conversation. I think some of us feel strongly that makes good sense to allocate some funds to exactly that course of action. We've obviously dodged a bullet. This is not Lake Tahoe, California right now with 500 inches of snow, so we're lucky, but appreciate you bringing that up, and hopefully we dodged the bullet for this season. Looking at Keith, and we'll take that in consideration as we're deliberating the budget for the next fiscal year. So thank you for raising that. Really appreciate it. Dr. Dunford. JD gives you that title.
What's that?
I said the JD gives you that title.
I'm here to voice my objection to the proposed charter amendment, as you all know. I, for one, was perplexed that this came about in February, over a month ago, when I saw your email, Andrew. I'm further more perplexed about the speed in which you guys are moving. I think the opening of this meeting gives me pause.
Can we clarify, Ben, you're talking about the
The
election?
charter amendment to restrict who can vote.
Okay,
You opened up the meeting with the building administrator's report, which basically discussed what property owners are doing and whether or not it conforms with the village code. Then you followed up by talking about having an hour and 45-minute listening session for an ethics ordinance. Yet there is no such listening session for significant proposed charter amendment. As I said in my emails to the council, the code of ordinance really focuses and regulates what a property owner can do. The term owner is listed 4 times more than the term resident in the code of ordinance. Susan, I see you looking, but that's true. You can look it up. So I think it's 138 to 30. The last major changes to the council, just going to the website, amending the code to clarify front loading garage restrictions, adopting requirements considering the installation operations of small wireless telecommunications facilities, correcting typographical errors relating to the building height, further regulation to the construction of curb cuts, driveways, and aprons to public right of way, specifically limit what a property owner can do, and has impacts on, I would argue, the value of the property owner's property. I tried to figure out why is this rushing. I've forgotten two basically answers. Is one, that previously, decades prior to the issuance of the original code or the original charter, I mean, there was the use of property was to limit voting rights was used as a way to disenfranchise voters. I hate to tell you this, so was actually creating municipalities. It just seems to me like it's rushed. The legislature is not moving forward with the proposed bill. There is no rush. It's not going to go forward until at least the next year. And then further, what really made me wonder is an email that was sent to the elections committee from Arthur, which said VMA residents, including caregivers, housekeepers, residing friends and relatives, and possibly others for whom Martin's Addition is their usual place of abode, we should notify them, I believe is what he's trying to get at, and let them know that they're eligible to vote, which is something I'm all for. But why are these individuals who are temporary residents to Martin's Addition, why is their voice worth more than a property owner? That's something I'm truly want to know. It's not a rhetorical question. This is an actual question. I believe Arthur during the meeting pointed out, I think he used the term derelict brother who's crashing on your couch. Why is his voice worth more than a non-resident property owner? Can somebody please tell me that?
Can I respond?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
this is not a new issue. And this has gone back many years where, the property owner, the right of a property owner to vote goes back to the, early days of this country, where the property owner was the only one who could vote. And gradually, the franchise was extended, to non-property owners, to non-males, and to former enslaved people. And property owner privilege was taken away as the enfranchisement. I have thought that the residue of that in the village charter was an unwelcome reminder of the illiberal days of the country's past, that it is the residents who are the voters. And whether it's a temporary attachment or a longer attachment, if you live here for a year, you're entitled to vote. If you live here the 30 years, you're entitled to vote. And I would always felt that the right to vote to a non-resident property owner was a referral back to past practices that no longer have a place in today's world. So
But those
that's
past practices were banned during the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which was passed 20 years before the charter was created. Like, it's not an homage to these past practices.
There were other
because-
reasons for putting that into the charter. And those reasons no longer have any impact. The reason was, if suppose you're serving in the State Department and you're sent to Albania for a year. For most purposes, you're still a resident here. And that's
Well,
been
actually-
recognized.
Well, we brought this up during the ethics meeting, and I pointed out that as a deployed military member, in order to become tax-free, you have to change your residence to that place. And I
Right.
will point out that on Taylor Street, there is a family who is a deployed State Department to Bahrain, and their residence is now in Bahrain. They still own the house. They're going to be coming back to the house once they serve our country honorably. But you're telling us that during that period of time, they're unable to vote.
It depends on where their place of residence is.
It's in Bahrain right now. They own the house here.
That doesn't
Place of residency is
necessarily-
Bahrain.
Ron could chime in on this, but that does not necessarily define your place of residence. Yeah, you can be in Florida and voting in Florida, that puts your residence there, not here. Ron, can you say that if you are temporarily assigned elsewhere, is your place of residence go with you?
Yeah, so there is some interpretation to be made with respect to the question of residency, but generally speaking, for voting purposes, it means your voter residency. And a military service person who's temporarily abroad can maintain the village as their voting residency for purposes of US and local voting laws. And it's something we can discuss when we get to the charter amendment. The town of Somerset recently addressed that issue, and I shared the language with you that they put in their charter to clarify that issue.
And also just.
And if I could just back up
Go
real
ahead.
quick as well. So stated simply, there's case law that provides allowing property owners to vote who do not reside in the jurisdiction can be an equal protection violation, can be unconstitutional because it dilutes the votes of the residents. There was one case some years ago, Tobin versus North Beach. And there's been other cases, and it's an issue that the Maryland Municipal League has brought to the village's attention. And, you know, it hasn't really been deemed a great issue in the past because there's probably not many folks that are actually fall into this situation. But, you know, as a result of the bill that was introduced, you know, we thought it was time to address it.
And if I
But to
could
the best
just
of your
add-
knowledge, nobody has filed a equal protection claim in Martin's Addition, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So without a claim, there really is no issue.
Well, the introduction of the bill, and as you rightfully said, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands of bills introduced that die in committee that don't go anywhere, but it was a helpful reminder for us to pick up on the conversation that is, that have been raised years and years, for years and years, and also We haven't had a listening session on this. This is kind of the first, maybe in-depth conversation since it's on the agenda, but no adoption is taking place today. So if you're requiring additional, if you and other residents would want to have additional conversations about it, we can have those, but we have to start somewhere. And so we felt that we wanted to address this, and here we are.
That is my request, and that seems contrary to the cover letter that was attached to the email. That's why I'm raising this concern, but thank you. I truly appreciate it. And I really look forward to.
The
having a
cover letter
listening
said there shall not be a listening session on this issue, or?
No, it just seemed like it was almost a done deal. It says, I can read it for you if you want.
No, it's okay. I
But
just wanted to make sure that we did not preclude this from.
No, it just, the
Okay.
way I interpreted was the village has already made a decision, Village Council has already made a decision. They're going to be moving forward in an attempt to appease Delegate Moon.
Well,
Process is gonna take some time.
yeah, it's gonna take a little time. We're not trying to appease anyone, but it was a helpful reminder here to address this
I mean, I
issue.
just view it as outdated and triggering language, and just changing it to resident from property owner is just a security blanket, and it's not about renter or a resident being worth more, it's about equality, it's actually the opposite then.
Katie, I can't hear you.
Yeah, there's some, where can we push that?
Maybe I moved my computer from there. Say it again.
Okay.
I mean,
Oh, nice.
Can you hear us now? Is that better?
Rewind. Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I was just saying that, the way I look at this issue is that I just view it as outdated and triggering language, and that changing to resident from property owner is just more of a security blanket term. And it's not saying that a resident versus a renter versus a property owner, no one is worth more. It's really just about equality.
And I like the Somerset highlighted example that Ron provided. So anyway, Ben.
Yeah.
More to come. If I'm happy to support, and we can vote on this when we get to this section on having a listening session. I'm not opposed to that at all. I think that's something that I feel strongly about on any given subject.
And
So-
I'm not opposed to the amendment. I just think we should talk about it and not just rush to judgment. That's my
Yeah.
primary.
Yeah, the good news is, we can't rush because of the process here. That's not gonna happen. But thank you. I really appreciate your comments, Ben.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'm not sure who M. Was is, but you're next and then Marty.
Yeah, hi, that's Larry.
Oh,
Watts.
Larry, there's no L in the M. Was, so I didn't recognize that.
Yeah, well, that's the boss's
Oh,
connection.
all right.
So,
Please.
the council is, governing body, voluntary. We've got a new manager. I'm absolutely stunned to see that the business of the council is taken up with items such as this ethics thing. Well, the safety of the village, which is the primary function of that government, has been ignored. I see people that have to now put sandbags on their driveways to stop the flooding from the street into their basement. My basement, which I wrote several letters about and sent videos about how it's flooding from street overflow after WSSC improperly crowned the thing. And I was told many times it was going to be fixed. It's never been fixed. That's a safety issue. And it's an unnecessary damage issue that you're ignoring. I spoke a year and a half ago during the street. When did we have the time that we had some voting activity out in front of the stores, and Andrew and Katie were there, and we had a conversation about how some of the Annapolis and Bowie and DC were handling the lighting problem for the safety of people by reimbursing residents who were putting up video observations with lighting in their house, that they were paying them for, they were reimbursing them. And we had a discussion how that would be a really good way to disperse some of the $4.5 million in excess funds that we have. But nothing's happened about it. The vandalism, the car thefts, this would be reduced immensely if that type of situation were pushed. We still have speeding, people running stop signs, and the amount of actual remedy of that has just been minuscule. We have antiquated gas lines where residents literally had water pouring out of the manifolds, gas manifolds of their furnaces, couldn't heat their houses for 4 days. That was 3 years ago. You go down around on Taylor and sections around Delafield and Chestnut, and you can smell gas coming up. Again and again, I've asked to have that area scoped, etc. I've even got the names of the companies that are used by the local utilities that do the scoping. Nothing. We have fire hydrants that are 50 years old. Those fire hydrants don't work in many cases. They desperately need to be flushed, inspected, and operated. WSSC owns them, does not allow the fire department to do anything about them. And for the fire chief to tell you that as far as they know, they called and they said, baloney. When you called them up and you asked to see the tickets that are filled out on the various pressures and flow rates for those hydrants that were inspected service, there are none. Nobody's doing the work. We have the ability to request the legislature to give us the right to do that type of testing and maintenance if we have to. Nothing's happening about it and nothing's being corrected. We have an obstructed right of way. These are all safety issues that you guys are totally ignoring while you go after this namby-pamby prissy crap about how you should expand the ethics committee. It is embarrassing. Why don't you govern properly, please? End of statement.
Thanks, Larry. Turn off the volume. There you go. Marty.
Thank you. And again, thank you once more for having that really helpful, friendly listening session on Tuesday night. I found it very informative and I really appreciate that. Let me pick up on something Ben said about the definition of owners voting versus not. I actually called the two Maryland delegates in the House of Representatives who sponsored the bill and talked to their staffs. And the bill is sitting in the Ways and Means Committee and is not likely to go anywhere anytime soon. That's my understanding. So there is no rush to do that. And in fact, if we could cramp for time tonight, you might want to table that because Andrew, I appreciate you saying that there will be a proper hearing and process because ordinance change, charter changes do require a more formal hearing process. So thank you for committing to do that. And again, there's absolutely no rush to do that change. I will say that I was on the election committee back in 2015 when we looked at what BMA had been doing for 100 years. At that point, we've been voting here since 1916. And there was a real discussion amongst the people who wrote the original election ordinance, the first written ordinance in 2015 about including the owners. And Ben, I take your point because we were really concerned about people on military service, people on State Department assignments, medical people having a 1 year, assignment to do research somewhere. There are neighbors here on Chestnut Street who are gone for 2 years at a time on various professional assignments. And we certainly don't want them to lose the right to vote during that time. And I think what we need, Ron, and I guess, I'm going to ask the council to ask you to do this, is to really give us some very clear language about making sure that those people don't get disenfranchised just for doing their jobs. So Ben, I agree with you. I'm concerned about that too. And there's no rush whatsoever. That bill may never get out of the Ways and Means Committee because apparently there's not a whole lot of support for it. Although the Municipal League is talking about it, it doesn't look like it's going anywhere in terms of legislation. So we have time on that. And it was discussed in detail in 2015 when we wrote the original ordinance. On the questions that Larry just raised, I ran on that platform that we needed to pay attention to safety issues, to real issues. And I think that in, 2020, 21, we spent an enormous amount of our energy on the original expansion of the ethics committee to have this jurisdiction and all these investigation procedures. It was enormous time expenditure of both residents and council time and committee time. And now here we are doing it again with a proposal to expand it, which, Andrew, I appreciate the ability to talk about that later because I don't want to get to it now, but I do agree that we really lose focus when we have to spend time. I mean, this whole business about the ethics ordinance is a self-inflicted problem. And things like the gas lines and street lighting and stop signs running all the time and, the street safety, all of that's the real stuff. The vandalism and car theft, whether or not our 10 hours a week of police are actually effective or just sort of a comfort, whether they actually work, is there a better way to do that? I mean, there are all these really substantive issues, and I would really encourage the council to discourage self-inflicted problems like the details of an ethics proposal and focus on the nitty-gritty hard stuff, the safety issues. So thank you. One other final thing, just as a small point now, which is I looked at the minutes and there was a request, a recommendation from the Community Engagement Committee that did not get listed in the minutes, and I don't know why it disappeared. They actually read a formal recommendation to the council at the last meeting, recommending that the council ask Michael and Aaron, our staff, to look into ways to better develop communication structures in Martin's Additions. We have no way right now, no online space where residents can talk to each other. And so when there are issues, whether it's snow shoveling, which I also think we should support, or safety issues or anything, there's no way for us to talk to each other. We don't have a mechanism. So I don't know why that recommendation from the CEC got omitted from the minutes, but I would urge you to add that back in because it's pretty important to the residents. It's come up repeatedly. It's not just a matter of fixing the listserv, which the residents are trying to do ourselves. Gene Sperling and I and others have been working on that for a month now. But it's a matter of having a structure, a communication structure. That was a pretty important recommendation from the Community Engagement Committee. As they said at the time, I went back and looked at it. As they said at the time, it's hard to have community engagement when you don't have a community communication structure. And I know, Katie, this is something that's near and dear to your heart. And so I would really ask you to maybe amend the minutes to make sure that recommendation is reflected in it because it's pretty important. And with that, I think.
Martin, I attended the meeting, and Andrew's co-liaison on the committee as well, but I know that they touched on it in the meeting prior to that. We spent a lot more time talking about the listserv, and I think we spent more of an update, that Gene Sperling is currently working on the existing listserv. And we spent a lot of our time and energy because it was crunch time to get ready for the LaFern event. So I think a lot of our time was spent on that, right, Keith? And also talking about a potential sidewalk celebration. So we just.
I wasn't being critical at all, Katie. I'm just bringing it back from the forefront.
We can make a mention of it in the notes.
I thought the recommendation to the council happened at the January meeting, not at the February meeting, which is the minutes you have in front of you today.
That may be true, Michael. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Because I know we spent a lot of time talking about the upcoming event.
And it was a great event. Thank you for that. If I hadn't said that already, it was a terrific event and kudos to the CEC for that. But they're right about the structural issue here, that we need some kind of community, I don't know, call it a message board or discussion board or some kind of online space where residents can talk to each other. Right now we have good top-down communication, much improved thanks to Michael and Katie and the whole council. But we don't have any side-to-side lateral communication structure, and that's a missing piece. So again, thank you for focusing on that.
And if I could just say one other thing, and we'll sit down with Michael as well to see, what has been done on some of these issues that have been raised. We can walk and chew gum here. So we can do all of these things or look at these things and we'll just we'll do some inventory here on what kind of things have occurred between, in Niles' final months or year and since Michael has taken over the manager role. So we'll do that assessment and take some stock and where things are. Thank you for your comments, Marty. Susan.
Hi, I just wanted to say I agreed with Nancy Ferris's idea that having snow shoveling provided by the village for certain people who want it sounds like a great idea. And also I support the idea that Ben Dunford had about the listening session or the hearing related to the voting, the charter amendment related to voting. Just sounds like a good idea to have some sort of hearing session for something big like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, okay, Naomi, just saved by the bell here. You're on mute. So we'll unmute you.
Just briefly to remind everyone, having served on the safety committee, that shoveling snow on the sidewalk was one of the top safety concerns of the village residents. Let us not lose sight of that.
Thank you, Naomi. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
So we did a little skipping and going back and forth, so I'm glad we did skip the approve the previous meeting minutes section because we just had some clarity, I think. I guess I'm gonna ask for us to do so, and if someone would like to move.
Okay, I will move to approve the previous meeting minutes.
Okay, we have a second. Jeff, second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. And so that's unanimous. Susan, I don't see.
Yeah, I said aye.
Okay, cool.
And one note on that, there's 2 attachments to the minutes. Those are what Jeff provided and shared at the last council meeting. And just to enter them into the public record, he shared those and I put them in as attachments in this packet. So
Okay.
everyone has those.
Okay, next is the discussion on Shepherd Street Park.
Okay, yes, Monty Bolin over the last year or two has been pushing to improve the park that is immediately adjacent to the village. And that the village uses both for official events and a lot of unofficial use by residents. He has been talking to the county parks department. They have come back and said, yeah, there's probably a way that the village could participate. They said, if you want to redo the whole park, the cost would be approximately $500,000. This wasn't scoped out for this particular project. It was just that this is a cost that we've seen elsewhere, they said. So my question is this, should we move forward with this? Should we task the manager to deal with the park to see how we might improve bits or pieces or the whole park, selecting out pieces that we think are most useful or most in need of repair? Should we appoint a committee? How should we proceed on this? I'm just looking for advice. It's not my project, but I will bring it to you to see how we might move forward with this, if we move forward at all.
I'm a little torn here. I know how much the kids love this park. And I feel like, unless there's precedent in the past where we've done so, it's opening a can of worms with the county that has the responsibility, just kind of saying, oh, here's a municipality that's got money, why don't we let them do it? And it's just gonna be a never-ending saga of us having to do it because they're gonna put it further and further down on their priority list because they think the BMA is gonna chip in. Having said that, I mean, I look at that, the resurfacing of the basketball court, which was what, a couple of years ago, it looks horrible. I mean, there's divots and all that. So, I mean, again, I'm torn, but I think it's something that I would hate to see the county just kind of flake out on.
Any other?
Well, I was wondering about our rescue plan funds and did that go to enhancing a community project like that, even though it's.
Hey, Katie, we can't hear you. We can't really hear you, Katie. Maybe you can get closer to the mic. I'd love to hear what you're saying. Sorry.
I was just saying that maybe we could use our American Rescue Plan funds, because are we on a timetable? Aren't they running out?
Yeah, I mean, we have time, but it's meant for, I think specifically for our jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And so we have some plans, I think, for infrastructure purposes for the stormwater challenges that we're facing. That includes Taylor, as was just mentioned by Larry, and our family that has many families have challenges. So the sandbags included. So I don't know. I mean, Jeff, you have thoughts?
My 2 cents. First of all, can folks hear me? Give me a thumbs up. I know people in the room can hear me. I'll go with it.
Yes, we
So
can.
awesome, thanks. Love the thumbs up, everyone.
Let's take a picture of Ben's
Yeah.
thumbs up just for
So
the
I'll
next
just,
conversation.
I'll make this brief, and I believe, Arthur, you saw this first, Monty, God bless him, I know he's very, very active around the park, not just this safety, and when he first shared the suggestion, I had turned it around and said, this seems right for like a public-private partnership, and there are these mechanisms through the county, and so, there's all sorts of things you can do with local businesses, and I think we all recognize that park is like a treasure that's not just local, but it is a major place for bus stops and so on and so forth. So my 2 cents is, I think this should be a community volunteer thing. Like, I think maybe we turn back to Monty, see what his time is. And, I don't see it as a VMA function, but I'm certainly just interested in it because I think, again, there's a lot we could do. I think businesses would be really interested. I don't think raising the $500,000 or as a public-private partnership, maybe it's like a match or something. So I think that there's opportunity, but as an official VMA thing, clear, I don't agree with that, but I think that there may be like some residents who could, I'd be more than happy to pitch in.
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to get on the cleanup.
Exactly.
circuit, so,
We do our events in the park, so,
right.
I feel like it's just paying.
The,
And I want to thank Monty for his very thorough research and in spearheading this initiative.
Monty has them on speed dial and they have him on speed dial, the county, so he's.
I've seen someone who gets such turnaround.
The park official was somewhat of a loss as to how this could happen.
Yeah,
They apparently do not have mechanisms set up to do this.
it has to go through the county but I'd be happy to follow up with Monty and we could, the listserv is unofficial. There could always be a note sent out seeing if there's any residents who are, but it would be a complete resident volunteer function, I think.
Feel free.
Yeah. So,
So is that the-
That's
is
my
that the
2 cents,
conclusion? Andrew, feel free to proceed on your own.
Yeah. I think, we can also wait until later in the residents, the tail end for resident comments.
Yeah.
Folks can comment on this, but also we can have this as an ongoing conversation. We can talk to Monty about, we could put this out to the community as well.
yeah. And one final thing, that doesn't preclude, for example, a letter of support from VMA, just
Right.
saying we endorse and we encourage this, but it doesn't mean that we need to put our resources in it, because I think, as mentioned, safety and other things take precedent. Yep.
Okay, committee updates. So let's start with the Community Engagement Committee. Keith. No.
All right. Keith Allen with the Community Engagement Committee. I don't have to say that, this was a huge success that we had with the firm because everybody agrees with that we did. And I think there was, Michael, 200 plus people that
We
attended that.
we gave out over 200 name tags, so.
It was a huge success. Beautiful day, both inside and outside. And we're gonna be working, we're gonna have a meeting next month in April. To talk about the celebration on the sidewalk, which we haven't had since 2019. So we're really excited about that and looking forward to that.
Can I just for a point of personal privilege, I think I will definitely like to attend the next Community Engagement Committee meeting, because I think in terms of resources, I know everyone thinks this is a large pot and there are priorities everywhere. I think for community building, I love Halloween, I love 4th of July, I love movie nights. I think we can use more of all of this. This in particular was wonderful. People could sit down around tables, they could stand around. I think we should have more than just one brunch a year. So I would encourage us to think of ways to, this is the spring, maybe have a fall or late summer type event at La Ferme again. At least twice a year, maybe more. I think it's just a wonderful opportunity for folks to catch up and to meet new residents as well.
And I've been already talking to the merchants about their participation in our sidewalk celebration here in May. I think we decided on, what was it, May 17th for that, Mike? Or did we just set a date on? We haven't set a date.
We haven't,
But,
the election is May 10th. So the celebration on the sidewalk, it would be that day
Okay.
is the current thinking. It
Yeah.
hasn't been officially
well, the
confirmed.
merchants are gonna win on this with us. They have price on haircuts and stuff like that, so. Anyway, that's,
I'll wait.
yeah.
Me too. Okay,
So, that's all
great.
for.
Well, thank you.
I
to-
want to thank Jeff. And also Paul.
Paul and Philip.
Philip.
Philip, yeah, no, thank you to you, Keith, and Philip,
Mhm.
and Paul, and to Michael and Aaron. For helping staff the event and help organize it, and
Okay.
Katie as well.
Katie and-
Everyone,
and Stephen.
everyone pitched in, and it was a great event. It was really wonderful event.
You didn't thank me for the 3 eggs Benedict.
Thank you. Art.
That's why they ran out
Yeah.
when I ordered mine.
So one just operational question, because we are doing the budget tonight. So is that a point where we would need to perhaps appropriate additional funds to
We
increase
actually
the
have
envelope? Or-
increased the
Okay,
budget a bit.
okay,
Seeing how popular
Yeah.
some of these things were.
okay. And we can always, because we can always during the year take a vote. So
Right.
there's.
Right.
All right, election committee.
Excuse me for interrupting. This is Naomi. Can we see you all? Is there a way that we can get a vision of you? Or are we going to stare at this
But now,
Martin's Editions?
No. You should be able to see us,
you have
Naomi.
to see the.
No,
whole
we don't
table.
see you. I don't see you.
There-
I
there
can
is-
see-
Raising.
You see the Hollywood Squares? One of those Hollywood Squares is the village office.
Okay, I don't see you faces, but I'll figure it out.
You
Well,
can pin that,
some of
that
us-
particular Hollywood Square, Naomi. You know how to pin?
I see you, Ron.
Yeah.
Only some of us have our personal computers here, so you'll see us close up. Some of you don't want to see us close
Look
up.
at the
but-
table. If you see somebody waving their hand at me,
Okay,
Okay,
we need a telephoto lens or bring the camera in close.
The audio is coming from this. So if your view is set up to only look at the audio, it's looking at my computer.
right.
Versus
so-
it's the Village of Martin's Editions. It's the one that has the camera of the entire room.
Yeah.
If you change
Yeah,
your view.
Naomi, you might have it defaulted as wherever that green line circles the box or not circles. the box.
okay, I will. All right, I didn't want to disturb you. Thank
Yeah,
you for
okay.
letting me
All
know.
right.
Okay.
Election committee update. Who do we have from the election committee?
So that's me. Good evening, everybody.
Okay, hello.
George is out of the country. Allison Price. I'll be quick. I don't know whether to start with the big item or finish with the big item. I'll start with the small things. We have finalized the instructions to the election vendor, which I believe we're working on the contract with that with Electech, we being the village. We are working on perfecting the voter roll regulations. We had a good discussion about that at the last meeting. Some of which was put on hold pending the outcome of discussions here. I don't know why we were asked, but we recommended the return to the celebration on the sidewalk on election day. We are working on the ballot packets and instructions. By the way, the final instructions to the election vendor will include a test mailing to the committee so that we don't run into the problems we had last year. We have a communications plan, and I guess the most significant thing to announce, as everybody should know, is that March 22, 6 p.m. is the deadline for nominations. So hope we get a bunch of good candidates this year, and we'll be having a public forum once we get those nominations.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Allison, and thanks for your service on the committee. Hope it's been rewarding. And not too time consuming. Okay, so ethics committee updates.
Yeah.
Lori.
Have a full report
Okay, full report from Lori.
from the ethics
from the ethics committee, well, as the chair of.
So, I guess I'm up here. I want to begin tonight by highlighting our committee's ongoing efforts to provide ethics training to enhance volunteer and staff understanding of the ethical obligations.
Can't hear you.
Okay, I
I
think
don't
you
think
might
they're
have
gonna hear
to,
you.
sorry. Well, if
It's the windows being open too.
you want to come here and sit here, you want to sit next to us?
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Michael.
Thank you, right here. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, now I'll cover it, too. Great. Thank you. Oh, on your camera. Yeah, okay.
You can be on two cameras. If you- We have every angle here.
All right. I want to begin tonight by highlighting our committee's ongoing effort to provide ethics training to enhance volunteer and staff understanding of the ethical obligations of the village ethics code. At this point, we've invited everyone required to complete the oath of office to training and have been pleased with the impressive turnout. A list of participant attendance is included in tonight's meeting packet on page 54 and will be attached to our end of year report. I want to specifically thank community engagement member Paul McGowan for his excellent feedback and suggestions, both of which the committee immediately agreed to adopt. Applying his community engagement expertise, he suggested we begin each session by allowing participants to introduce themselves. I wish I had thought of that myself because it's helpful to know something about each other, especially when discussing ethical dilemmas as a group. His second suggestion resulted in the creation of a new training slide. Michael, will you please display this slide here? It's slide here. Oops, wrong one. Oh, that's it. Thank you. So Paul suggested right out of the gate for the training that it takes some time to explain why the committee offers ethics training. Paul said, let's just say because it's the law and because it's good government. But we got lawyer on our committee involved and he refined it a little and said, because the village ethics code, consistent with Maryland law, must be followed by all village public officials and employees. And second, because ensuring that village decisions are impartial and free from conflict of interest is at the heart of good governance. I would add that we conduct ethics training to prevent ethics complaints. Research demonstrates that effective ethics training reduces ethics complaints and is widely considered a best practice. Thanks again, Paul, for your input. He's not here tonight. He's doing March Madness. I learned.
That's where I wish I was.
Sure, Michael.
Yeah.
We'd rather be here.
It's kind of like at 11:30. So I would add,
That's gonna go into tomorrow, by the way, St. Patrick's Day. So he's going right through the weekend with it.
I would add that, okay, sorry. Moving on to tonight's agenda. I would like to review the two ethics-related votes the council will take this evening. First, the Ethics Committee recommended the resolution included in tonight's meeting packet, which would modify the current policy governing oaths of office by removing the notarization requirement, with the exception of council members, which Maryland law requires be notarized. For a brief history, this topic was initially raised at both the December Ethics Committee and council meetings. Based on our experience of going through the document review process a couple of times now, the committee identified the notarization requirement as an impediment for some volunteers to submit their required forms in a timely manner. Removing the notarization requirement will modernize the process by allowing volunteers to submit their forms electronically. The resolution was drafted by Ron at the council's chair request. The updated policy also includes the newly revised conflict of interest questionnaire. The other vote this evening will be on the Ethics Committee unanimous recommendation to amend the Village Ethics Code to expand the definition of public officials to include all committees and ad hoc committees. As stated previously, our primary rationale for making this recommendation is to ensure better consistency in the application of the village code and to align the code with the current village policy, which requires all committees to take the oath of office and submit a conflict of interest form. From a best practice standpoint, with few exceptions, municipal governments apply one consistent set of ethics standards across the board. To be clear, the one sentence amendment is not a wide-ranging change to the current ethics code, but instead mirrors the 2021 Ethics Committee original recommendation, which was changed during the March 2021 meeting in the final minutes before a supermajority of the council members adopted the ordinance, with no council members voting against it. The committee recommendation also does not expand the core responsibility of the committee, which are limited in scope to: one, assuring that village officials avoid conflicts between their personal roles and village interests. Two, to assure that village public officials act with impartiality when executing their official duties. And three, to respond to any requests from officials for advisory opinions and act on any complaints alleging that an official has a conflict of interest or has breached their duty of impartiality. While considering this recommendation, the committee also discussed what effect, if any, the passage of the 2021 ordinance had on the number of complaints received and resident willingness to volunteer. In the almost 2 years since the adoption of the expanded ethics ordinance, there have been no ethics complaints received by the committee, and as a result, no complaint-related attorney costs. Similarly, the ordinance's passage appears to have had no negative impact on residents willing to volunteer, as the village has experienced a verifiable increase in the number of residents volunteering for committees and running for council. It's worth noting that one of the primary arguments the village presented to the Maryland Ethics Commission in 2011 in requesting its current ethics waiver was the lack of candidates for council position. Despite the passage of the expanded ordinance, every council election in recent years has been competitive. To be clear, the amendment is a one-sentence revision to align the code with the existing policy that since 2019 has required all committee members to submit an oath of office and conflict of interest statement. The amendment does not add a new requirement. The 2021 expansion codified a procedure to uphold the oath of office and conflict of interest obligations while ensuring confidentiality and due process. Currently, volunteers who take the oath but are not covered by the code do not have these protections. The committee recommended the amendment to provide a consistent application of the code and ensure all committee members are entitled to these same protections. Since there have been questions raised concerning the so-called urgency of tonight's amendment, I would like to review the timeline and process leading up to tonight's vote. Michael, I see you nodding. You're up here. We're going to display, we have a process flow chart here. Beginning at the top of the chart, in 2019, the council voted unanimously to adopt the resolution requiring that all committees sign an oath and submit a conflict of interest form. Andrew, you and I happened to attend that meeting in different capacities. I don't know if you remember that. In 2020, in response to 2 ethics complaints, the committee was directed by the village council to work with the village attorney to draft the expanded ethics ordinance. The ordinance went through multiple revisions to incorporate substantive resident and council input. In March of 2021, the ordinance was revised at the last minute and adopted by a supermajority of the council. Later, we see the stop sign here. In 2022, the Ethics Committee, during its newly established document review process, questioned a conflict between the public officials required to submit an oath and those protected by the due process and confidentiality provisions of the village code. Similar to the process employed in 2020, 2021, before considering a recommendation to the council to amend the code, the committee sought input for the council at the September meeting. During the September meeting, 3 members of the council spoke in support of the amendment and directed the committee to consider the issue. It's worth noting that even before the committee had a chance to discuss making the recommendation in an open meeting, the village attorney was directed by the council to draft the amendment language. As is evident by the chart, have been ample opportunities for resident comments and council input at every stage of the process. Thanks, Nicole.
No problem.
Yesterday afternoon, Andrew sent me what he considered to be the highlights of Tuesday's ethics listening session, with resident comments to be addressed by the committee. On behalf of the committee, longtime committee member and former chair, Mark Efron, drafted the following responses. 1, the first question is, why is it necessary for non-statutory committees? Can we live without it? Answer, the non-code committees take the same oath as the code committees and are bound by the same conflict of interest requirements. They also take official actions on behalf of the village, including selecting vendors for events and other purposes. To protect the village and to assure unbiased action, the enforcement provisions of the code based on the oath and COI provisions should be equally applicable to code and non-code committees. Second question, why is recusal just voluntary? Should there be a mechanism in place to determine why a recusal is required? Answer, recusal, whether voluntary or pursuant to the advice of the ethics committee, is required under the code when there is a conflict of interest. Notice of any conflict of interest is mandatory under the current code before any official action. Under the code, any village official can either recuse himself or herself from an official action where he or she has a conflict of interest, or seek an advisory opinion from the ethics committee if he or she cannot determine if he or she has a conflict of interest requiring recusal. In short, under the code, notice of a conflict of interest is mandatory, as is appropriate action by the official with a conflict of interest, recusal or seeking an opinion from the ethics committee. Question 3. Factions and favoritism make it difficult for members of the community to want to risk the exposure for fear of being singled out for ethics complaints. Answer, the ethics committee, which was unanimously appointed by the council, has taken the oath to act with strict impartiality. Like any other village officials, the members of the ethics committee are subject to the enforcement provisions of the code if they violate the oath's provision about impartiality. There is no history or factual basis for any allegation of favoritism on the part of any member of the committee, and to suggest otherwise is scurrilous. With respect to the factions, a number of village residents have resisted changes to the ethics provision of the code since 2021 and continue to do so today, making the very same arguments they made in 2021. They, and not the ethics committee, which has taken no steps contrary to the council's approval, have created a faction. A number of these people have been appointed to village committees and or have volunteer committees since the passage of the expansion, which undercuts their stated concern about risk or fear of being singled out. Question 4. The council should be the first stop because of the risk of partiality. Andrew noted that he argued against this, flipping this argument on his head, and discussed the need for an independent entity as exists in the Maryland Code. Answer, as Andrew points out, the council taking over the role of the ethics committee would violate Maryland law mandating an independent ethics body. It would also change the way in which VMA has operated for many, many years, way before the 2021 changes to the ethics code. Further, as stated above, The committee, just like the council, takes an oath that includes acting with impartiality. Committee members are no more likely to violate the oath than our council members. And to suggest otherwise is factually baseless and inflammatory. Part 2 of the question: what is the accountability of folks on the committee? Again, the committee is taking the oath of impartiality and is subject to the same enforcement provisions as other VMA officials. The members are just as accountable under the code's enforcement provisions as are other members. Part 3, while we can vote out a council member, we can't do that for committee members. Obviously, the council can remove committee members at any time. One resident argued that the council is ceding its power, delegating responsibility. Answer: Maryland law and best practices mandate an independent ethics committee, so the council is not ceding any power or responsibility it has under Maryland law. Question 5. Legal consequences were raised as well as the public aspects of ethics procedures. Answer: the changes to the code made in 2021, and this is as Arthur noted, removed more harsh penalty consequences and bolstered the privacy confidentiality provisions. In this vein, having the council involved in the resolution of ethics complaints from the outset would jeopardize those confidentiality provisions by disclosing allegations and names to 5 people, council members, before any determination is made by the committee. 6, the cost to a defendant and unlimited spending power of the committee is another issue raised. Answer: the council has an obligation to protect VMA from legal liability. To the extent that a lawyer is involved in the enforcement process, that is a necessary expense to protect the village. It is not to add to the committee's firepower, as the stated concern suggests. Putting a limit on legal expenditures cuts against the council's obligation to protect the village. The same would be true if the council evaluated ethics complaints. To protect the village, a lawyer should be involved. Mark also addressed Jeff's concerns raised on pages 6 through 9 of tonight's meeting packet. Question 1, what is the impact of the current ethics ordinance on residents' willingness to volunteer? What level of resident support is there for the proposed ethics ordinance? Answer: there is no evidence that the current code adversely impacts volunteering. Evidence of support for the proposed amendment leadership should not be based on flash polls. Light turnout of residents at committee and prior council discussions shows only a modest amount of dissent from the same people who opposed the 2021 code changes. Jeff's question number 2, information sharing and timing. Under the current ordinance and review process, when exactly does the council first find out about ethics complaints submitted to the committee for a determination, and if needed, investigation? Is this after a determination and recommendation that a violation occurred or not by the committee? Is this the same for council members, committee members, and village staff? Is there a specific window of time when the council must be informed upon a submission of a complaint? Answer: under the current code, the ethics committee must notify the council of an ethics complaint if it survives an initial assessment by the committee. The initial assessment is to make sure that a complaint meets the code requirements for complaint. It does not involve a substantive review or conclusion, so the council would be notified very soon after a complaint is filed. Jeff's question number 3, costs associated with implementation. Can the committee initiate an independent investigation and request VMA legal counsel for billable hours to research a complaint of a resident volunteer, employee, or council member without first consulting the council to start the clock? In other words, does the council have any input or decision-making authority on whether an investigation of a complaint specific to a resident volunteer is pursued and legal advice is sought? Is there any cap on what these costs might incur with or without council intervention? Answer. If a complaint survives the initial assessment, the ethics committee must advise the council and must consult the village attorney. The use of the village attorney is for the protection of VMA. A cap on his or her fees would jeopardize the village, which would seem unwise. Question number 4, dual submissions and reconciliation. What happens if the same complaint is submitted both to the council and the ethics committee? What is the process for communication and reconciliation for dual submission? Answer. The code is clear with respect to how an ethics complaint should be filed. That is, it should be filed with the ethics committee. If somebody files a complaint with the council outside of the code's requirement, the council, probably with the advice of the village lawyer, would have to decide what to do with it. For example, the council could reject it as not compliant with the code, take it up even though it is not code compliant, or refer it to the committee. Without expressing a legal opinion, based on the code's specific provisions, a complaint filed with a body other than the ethics committee would seem improper. Question 5. Tweak the process and empower the council specific to resident volunteer complaints. How might we amend the code to say the ethics committee must inform the council of all complaints received on behalf of all resident volunteers? The council reserves its independent authority to take administrative actions to engage conflict resolution or as needed to remove a resident volunteer from their appointed position as deemed necessary to resolve urgent matters impacting village affairs or business. Answer. Under the current code, the committee must inform the council of any ethics complaint that survives the initial review or whether it meets the code standards, is under the code, consistent with the code, timely, non-moot, and consequential. Question 6. Why the risk in burning urgency? Shouldn't we carefully consider important resident concerns and possible gaps in process and procedures before expanding to all resident volunteers? Answer. This process has not been rushed at all. Again, please see the chart on the chronology of the proposed amendment. Question 7. This is not about a wholesale change or whether the council wants to be a gatekeeper. Answer. Whereas the proposed amendment is minor, the council's intrusion into the ethics committee independence would be a major change, and it would be inconsistent with Maryland law and years of village governance. Question 8. By not communicating upfront to the council that a complaint has been submitted against a resident volunteer, it prevents the council, through lack of timely information sharing, its ability to use existing authorities to immediately look to mediate and resolve problems. Answer. Under the current code, the council is advised of an ethics complaints before the committee investigates and rules on them. And the council gets the final say on any ethics complaint that the committee finds to be valid. Question 9. Lack of timely information prevents the council from immediately becoming involved. Answer. Under Maryland law, the ethics body must be independent of the elected body, i.e. the council. For the council to substitute itself for the committee in the ethics complaint process would be inconsistent with Maryland law, years and years of village practice, and the practices of neighboring jurisdictions. And finally, in reference to the 2 bottom line issues included in the packet. First, how can we improve communication between the committee and council when a complaint targeted towards a resident volunteer is submitted? Answer. The code mandates that after an initial assessment period, the council and subject of the complaint are notified. In other words, under the current code, the ethics committee must notify the council of any ethics complaint that survives the committee's initial assessment. Question 2. Clarify the council's right to use its existing authorities to resolve problems on committees among resident volunteers that have an administrative solution, while a committee's review might take independently without delay on the ethical issues raised. Answer. The committee's responsibilities are limited by the code to the issues of duty, of impartiality, and conflicts of interest. With respect to ethics complaints, the 2021 changes to the ethics code added requirements that the committee must seek an informal resolution of the ethics complaints that are based on a mistake or inadvertence, and must dismiss complaints that are inconsequential. The 2021 changes to the code also added a provision that requires the council's approval before there is any final finding of an ethics violation. Thus, under the current code, the committee and the council must act before there is determination of an ethics violation and are empowered to seek informal resolutions of ethics complaints. Further, I want to thank Mark because he provided those answers. But further, I'd like to share some ethics research that I compiled at Andrew's request, which addresses a council member's suggestion to rewrite the ethics code to establish the council as the first line of receipt of ethics complaints. That proposal is based on a false premise. The request during the January meeting that the Ethics Committee and Village Council draft code language to restore the council's authority to hear ethics complaints. However, since 2015, when the Ethics Committee was separated from the Elections Committee and made its own entity, and probably well before then, the Village Code never gave the council the authority to receive and hear ethics complaints. Notably, before the March 2021 changes to the ethics section of the code, which have been cited as the target of the proposed code change, all ethics complaints were sent to and resolved by the Ethics Committee with the assistance of the village attorney, not the council. According to the code before the 2021 amendment, quote, any person alleging a violation of this chapter may file a written complaint under oath with the committee. Upon receipt of such complaint, the committee shall send a written acknowledgement of its receipt, notify the official in the council of the allegation, and remove the complaint and review the complaint with the village attorney. If the village attorney recommends that special counsel be appointed, special counsel should be selected by the committee and appointed by the council. If upon consultation with the village attorney or special counsel, the committee determines that the complaint should be addressed by the committee shall request the official provide the committee such information as the committee finds necessary to determine the presence or absence of a conflict of interest. A written complaint shall not require a formal hearing. Such complaint shall be processed under the procedures described in subsection C, D, and E of this section. Upon final resolution of the matters alleged, the committee shall provide a written summary of the resolution to the official, the council, and the person who filed the complaint. That was the code prior to the amendment. In fact, the 2021 code gave the council authority it did not previously have. As a result of the 2021 changes, the VMA council has the final say on ethics complaints, unless there is no quorum because of recusals. That was purposeful, to set up a two-tiered procedure to protect the rights of the subject of an ethics complaint and to recognize the council's interest in enforcing ethics rules. Under the proposed code change, the role of the ethics committee would be eliminated unless the council, in its sole discretion, asks for the committee's help. This change would be consequential. Without giving the council authority that it does not already have the final say on ethics complaint, the two-tiered system, which protects VMA officials who may become subjects of complaints, would disappear. Also, as described in the village code, section 4202(6), as amended, the proposed change may jeopardize VMA's exemption from more stringent ethics laws, which would be contrary to state and local standards. The Village Code Section 2-101B specifically prohibits council members from serving on the Ethics Committee, which is designed to create an ethics body independent of elected officials and tracks with the Maryland Ethics Code. Given the council authority currently delegated to the Ethics Committee would effectively destroy the code's mandate for an independent ethics committee and would be contrary to state law. Since its inception in 2015, the Ethics Committee, not the council, has been charged with receiving, investigating, and determining the outcome of ethics complaints. Prior to 2015, the combined Ethics Election Committee, not the council, was responsible for ethics-related determinations. If the proposed change to the Ethics Code were to be enacted, the council could unilaterally decide to substitute the council for the Ethics Committee with regard to ethics complaints, which would change years of village governance and eviscerate the purpose of the code-mandated Ethics Committee. Further, the model Maryland Ethics Code, adopted by the state to guide local municipalities in developing ethics regulations, gives ethics committees the responsibility for receiving and resolving ethics complaints. Substituting the council for the ethics committee with regard to ethics complaints would be contrary to the state's model code. Consistent with the state model code, local jurisdictions with ethics bodies all delegate their ethics commissions responsibility for receiving and resolving ethics complaints. The assertion at the January meeting that it is very standard practice for councils to be the first line of receipt of ethics complaints is contradicted by the ethics practices of the surrounding municipalities, Montgomery County, and Maryland State Ethics Commissions. According to the village attorney, in granting the village a waiver from the state requirement that municipalities have full-blown ethics codes, the state noted that the village had an independent ethics committee. Eliminating the ethics committee independence in receiving, investigating, and deciding ethics complaints could jeopardize that exemption and cause the village to be required to adopt a full-blown ethics code mandating detailed financial disclosures by all village officials and annual state recertifications of the code. You can listen to Ron's comments in the January council meeting audio at the 1:47-minute mark. Over the last 2 years, at the request of residents, the council has spent considerable time revising the village election plan to ensure close adherence to county and state election regulations. Applying the same standard, the current ethics code is consistent with the best practices of state and county ethics commissions. By contrast, substituting the council for the ethics committee in receiving, investigating, and determining ethics complaints would be totally inconsistent with best practices of state and county commissions. Okay, we're getting to the end here. In addition, I believe Jeff will be presenting his 6-point plan this evening, which I will try to address to the greatest extent possible as a single member of a 3-person committee, with the exception of point 5, which I'll address now. In point 5, Jeff suggests for both consistency and clear guidance on definitions, we use consistent terms identified within the Code of Ordinances and training materials by replacing strict impartiality with duty of impartiality in the oath. Jeff and I are in agreement on this. Personally, I've noticed several discrepancies or conflicts throughout the entire ethic code that should be updated. Actually, not through the entire ethics code, through the entire village code, which should be updated. In the same spirit, I hope Jeff's vote tonight will be in favor of the amendment, which will eliminate the current conflict between the code and existing policy. In summary, adoption of the committee's recommendation to amend the ethics code by making it applicable to all village committees and task forces, including to those which is currently applicable, would ensure consistency within the village code and reinforce current village policy. Finally, really finally, since the ethics committee spent considerable time compiling these factual responses to questions, Andrew, I'm asking that you agree to make this report part of the public record and include it as an appendix in the meeting minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say yes, or do we need a vote on that?
Yeah.
I think we can just do it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Okay.
I just, very briefly, bravo.
Yeah, really excellent.
And I do have one question, you don't have to respond, is whether or not I vote in the affirmative, we still get to do our walks, is that okay?
So do.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good.
Yes.
Can I just say that there was a level of confusion as to the participation of ethics committee members at the listening session and them not being present. I wanted to make sure to raise the concerns that were, or to provide the committee with the concerns that were raised during the listening session. So I did not realize that they would be responded to verbatim and in such great detail, but I really appreciate it, Lori, for your time, for Mark's time in particular also. I
Alex
thought
contributed as well.
Alex as well. Thank you, Alex, who I think was on or still is on. Here he is. Yep.
Yep.
So
Let me just say, former liaison to the ethics committee, no one is as efficient or thorough
Yes.
as Lauren.
no,
That I
very,
know.
very thorough. And look, I remember the first go around on this. There was a uproar and unfortunately a little bit of hyperbole, but also I think some of the explanations coming from residents, I think were not accurate. And so this was super helpful in providing us context and answers. And in legalese that was understandable, I think for most residents. So I think to me, the consistency matter is paramount and having the onus on only some resident volunteers, but not others, and then also protecting those others, I think is critically important, and being consistent also with Maryland law and best practices. So I appreciate it. I'd like to open the floor to the council and then to residents for comments. And Tiffany, I'll go to Tiffany first. Once we get to that part, might not be related to this conversation. Her hand went up late. And I did not see that in the initial resident comment section. So I don't know, Jeff, we're clearly went from the committee updates straight into the public hearing, possible adoption of the ordinance.
Oh,
So,
okay. So this would be the time before a vote, is that?
I mean,
for
we're
us? Yeah, yeah.
obviously, whether we're still in committee
And-
update or not, we're in the time before a vote, period.
I defer to others and also just want to, in terms of process, the public may comment too, so I wasn't sure. I think typically what happens is public comments and then we kind of do our council thing, but I'm totally open if, I'm happy to take a
So-
few minutes now.
Two things. We've had the listening session and we'll have some public comments as well. But I know that you wanted the floor in having and speaking on this particular issue, so I wanted
Sure.
to give you the opportunity. You also mentioned that you have a deadline here tonight. So I want to make sure that and if there are some questions answered that you agreed with, you can skip over this happily. That you agree with, of course, only.
Awesome. So what I'll do is I promise to be relatively brief. I don't expect to take up too much time, but I appreciate Lori with the drum roll on the 6-point plan. So really, I just wanted to, share that. And the thoughts I have, I want to be very clear. This is not contingent or trying to persuade other votes. This is just based upon a preponderance of feedback from both residents. The feedback, even though this is the first time, quite frankly, a lot of what I've heard this evening, I think also very much feeds into the things that has already been shared. Ron has been magnificent and has provided an awful lot. So I think a lot of that is in congruence with what you shared, the listening session. So really, this is, I think everyone knows, I don't think this is a surprise in terms of where my vote is, and that's all good. So again, this is just about, I want to share some things around the go forward, you know, regardless of tonight, because just some thoughts that I had. So that's really where this is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see.
Jeff, is this the thing that you had sent around earlier?
The one that is in the packet is from the last meeting.
Right.
The one I'm about to share is an updated one based upon the feedback from the last
okay.
couple of days. And this will be resubmitted for the next set of meeting minutes.
Okay.
All right, so I appreciate this. And ideally, people can see this. I appreciate everyone's patience as we start to.
Go to just. Yeah, okay.
Let's see if this works. No,
Oops, I'm
I don't
sorry.
think
What
that
did I do?
works. Sorry about that.
Well, he did. I thought-
Okay, I think this is, so great. Again, I just want to thank everyone. This will be brief, but essentially, what Lori had gone through were some questions, and again, really grateful. Bravo, like really, that was magnificent. And so today is just some updates based upon some of the feedback that has been received from residents, and also Ron and some others who have, I'm grateful for their time. And really, thank you. I'm coming back from a couple weeks on the African continent. So thank you, Asante Sana. And I don't have my coffee, but I'm going to do my best. So really, I just want to share the goals from the last session and just show where we are. You know, host the community listening session completed. Have formal written responses from the attorney on various questions completed. Also, just skipping down, answers very specific in terms of just this impact on willingness of volunteers. And I think some of this is in process. I think we have some good impact inputs. I also believe that there's a letter that's been submitted by about 30 or 32 residents expressing their opinions and perhaps concern or perhaps how it might impact. So one of the things as part of my plan, I'll show you where I feel that just as part of a lot of things that affect our village, I hope that in the next annual survey, we may have a question on this, but also a question on volunteerism to really maybe delve into some of the barriers. It could be just many people are very busy, but maybe there are other things, and we'll get to the bottom of that. The other piece, so here's the 6-point plan that has, I think, a lot of drum roll and really, again, shaping and the input. So the first is communication between the ethics and the council. And I apologize, commission was, I think, Ron, when we were first doing this, we were using committee and commission interchangeably. So that kind of snuck in. So I do want to just clarify, and again, this is not, I think these are discussion points after. This is not meant as a big, discussion now, and really the idea of having an opportunity to follow up. So I want to clarify that this is not about the council or making a suggestion the council should be taking over the authority of the ethics committee. I think I just want to be very clear. So all the reasons that Mark very carefully laid out, what this is just simply saying is the idea that we do have simpatico on information, and whether or not that happens before you make a determination. The only reason why I say that is I feel that there really is no particular reason why the council shouldn't have that information, meaning we are not interfering, we're not getting in the way of the ethics committee. It's more of just understanding, because again, thinking about this from a human resources perspective, that perhaps there are things that we could do within our authority. There's no question we have an authority where we could tell a volunteer, the best thing to do is to step aside. So really, it's a suggestion that perhaps within a couple business days, and again, it may be that you need more time to make a determination, is the idea that there is this opportunity of defining when we would have that information. Again, it has nothing to do with short-circuiting the idea that the actual committee itself should be doing an investigation. We'd have no decision. Again, complete independence. It's just the idea of sharing that information.
I think I can answer that, maybe.
You may want to come up here again if you want
Oh,
to,
I'm sorry. Okay.
just, yeah.
I just didn't want people to think I was.
Well, you have till March 22nd to nominate it, so.
And I just want to be careful.
Yeah.
I didn't intend for this to take up this amount of time. It was more of just throwing it out there. This is not trying to upend the idea of taking a vote. It's just the plan of discussion. So,
Andrew sent this, like, I don't know, quite a bit of information around like 5 o'clock yesterday. So.
What's,
yeah,
all of this?
All of that.
Yeah.
We've been kind of,
Yeah.
working like we were all in school again. That's right.
I can't hear you.
Get up to the,
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so, oh, sorry, I thought that was in full. All right, so yes, Jeff, we write the initial assessment basically is just to see if the complaint can be dismissed. Is it, is it consequential? Does it meet the requirements? Is it in writing? Is it non-moot? And then the council and the person who's the subject of the complaint is notified immediately. So it's not like, I can't imagine that, looking at the complaint, it would take us a long time to do that. Now, I did see on slide 11 of your PowerPoint, and Mark did address that in a different issue, that you at one point had thought about having the council notified concurrently at the same time as the committee. And
yeah,
right?
and again, this is iterative, right? So it's not meant to, I think those are parts of just ad hoc thought. So this is sort of the 6-point plan is really the idea of the updated piece, right?
Okay,
So
well,
we're.
I just want to say that, we set up this
Yeah.
email account to have a confidential, and that was one of the things that we had a lot of resident feedback on, that they wanted a confidential process, which is different than most of the other ethics commissions where there's a public hearing to discuss ethics complaints.
Yeah.
The village really goes pretty far, and the ethics committee is part of that. It's a 3-person committee that's appointed by the council with a confidential email box. We review the initial complaint and let the council know about it. So it's not, we're not investigating, we're not talking, well, I don't think we're talking to Ron unless we have a question about whether this is valid or not, but.
Yeah.
But,
So, again, I think this is, up for discussion, and I think the idea is that there's going to be a very short turnaround, and so the idea of needing, we know what it takes and what you have to do to change code. So I
right,
think the idea as part of, informal policy, we recognize there'll be short turnaround. And I think the only thing to continue to discuss is recognizing, and again, we're all part of the same team. So being able to work with the ethics council,
right,
recognizing that, again, you are totally independent. This is not the idea of us trying to get in the way of your entire process, because again, that is best practice. It's more of the idea in parallel that it's recognized we can take action, right? What if there's a real burning issue that there's just a poison pill, and meaning, on the committee, and that for whatever reason it does advance to an investigation? Well, frankly, we really can't wait. We may have to go to that committee member and say, it's time to step aside. So again, and even if we do that, I know that in the code, if they're no longer a volunteer, it
Right.
could be dismissed. But what I'm saying is working together that, you have your complete independent authority to do your investigation, which is exactly how it should be. But again, as a council, if there's a poison pill that we, understanding that we're not conflicting with your ongoing investigation, that we could take action, because if it impacts the entire community, for example, what if it's someone, and again, I know there are a lot of people here, so I want to be careful, but what if you get a situation that just doesn't work out on the election committee? I don't think that we can afford to wait, and if we need to, we can step in. So I just put that out.
Well, I don't know that you're prevented
We're not.
from acting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, aren't there, you know, it's always talking about you can remove volunteers,
right.
which I understand that to be the case.
Mhm.
But at the same time, part of the reason this code was written the way it is, and part of the resident feedback was that they wanted people subject to a complaint to have due process protections. They don't necessarily have that with the council, but they have that with the ethics committee as mandated by the code. So,
All good. And I think, as you said, and I think, you know, Ron, yeah, you can chime in or not, but just restating, there's nothing about this that says the council can't do what you know, there's nothing about the ordinance that takes away our authority. I'm just recognizing that. And also, what I'm sharing here in this first point is it has nothing to do with interfering with your authority. It's just recognizing that if we need to take action, we can. And I don't think there's anyone who's disagreeing that we can. So, okay.
okay.
Yeah,
Are we-
we're still number one.
I'm telling you, it's
Faster than that.
it is gonna move. It's gonna move.
Okay.
So the second is this, I know that there's been some issues raised about the cost. So again, this is illustrative. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but for example, even in the code itself, it talks about anything that goes over $10,000, there needs to be, you know, a signal, you know, from the council. So I think it's worth perhaps taking up. And I understand the idea of not capping because of everything you shared, but I think maybe it's more of a discussion of communication with the council. So maybe this is already there, but if it does look like it's going to be investigation that is going to take up a bit of resources, just so that we know. I think that's really what I'm thinking.
That's a good question, Jeff. And maybe Ron could answer that, because does Ron have any obligation to report to the council his expenses for an investigation?
Ron, do you know the answer?
Sure. So, yeah, as currently written, there'd be no obligation for me to go report to the council as to how much is being incurred.
And again, this goes both ways here. If the council, plays the heavy here and is a council member is subject to an investigation and says, we want to limit the village lawyer's ability to work with the ethics committee on a valid complaint or issue, that's not a good thing. At the same time, I understand the concern, because if there's a need for a council member to retain counsel, SEL, that's costly.
And again, this was not meant to resolve everything. I think one point, and Andrew, I just want to share is, the distinctions here is this is really about focusing on resident volunteers. I think we all agree that council members should be recused from any scintilla of a doubt that we would be somehow looked at as interfering with an investigation of a council member. So this is really focusing on resident volunteers. I just want to share that in case that wasn't clear. Okay, so I think we could just move on, and those could be, future discussions. So the other piece around the training, and again, I want to really, just again, kudos, because recognizing how difficult it is to do a training from scratch. And I've read through it. I guess in reading through it, I guess I didn't acknowledge the fact that I've actually taken it, but I've gone through it a number of times, and so really kudos. So really, this is just a question of, in terms of you take a training,
Right.
and let's say as in the training as it stands, scenarios just aren't there. We're doing this. We are leaders in this, right? I mean, I think it's recognized that VMA is one of the front runners in really shaping and having an ethics committee at this level of government. And so we're learning as we go on some level. So, what happens if you do a training
Mhm.
and you're really doing a good job, and for whatever reason, someone files a complaint and we realize, you know what? It really wasn't part of our scenario. So I just want to kind of point that out, that in terms of holding folks accountable, for a potential ethics violation and then an investigation when they've done a training, but it wasn't part of the training, how we address that. And again, whether or not it gets to a point where, for example, if it's a resident volunteer, would you really toss them off, or however this would go, versus understanding they just didn't have the training on the topic, and that we have to kind of take a mulligan and say, we appreciate it, and we're going to include this in the next training, but we're not going to really investigate this and come up with an idea that you need to be kicked off because you didn't know how to address the issue.
Okay, well, that raises a good question that we've considered as well, that right now there's no requirement that volunteers even attend training. And some volunteers have.
Still can't hear you.
Okay, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no requirement right now, Lori mentioned, for resident volunteers to attend
Ethics
training,
Right.
ethics training. So that's a challenge in and of itself.
And one thing that we always, part of the training is we ask every volunteer to review the code in its entirety. So when I read this, I guess I misunderstood it because I thought you thought we needed a scenario for every possible scenario.
It's recognizing that we don't know everything. And again, we don't have to address this now. I know Ron had shared his thoughts on, if someone does not take a training,
Right.
for whatever reason, well, they're still held accountable. I think this is the idea. If they do take a training, but for whatever reason, because we are forging new territory, just how we address that, because how do you address an accountability when they did take the training, but they just weren't included on that particular issue?
Right. Well, I think if you look at the practices, I did a lot of research when we were working on the training. The government, if you go to training and something's not covered, you're still responsible for understanding what your obligations are, if there's a code or if there's laws. I know, Michael, I don't want to put you on a difficult spot here, but Michael and I had a conversation because his former employer was involved with some ethics training. And he had said that our training was very similar to what the training that they recommend for municipalities.
Awesome. All right, we're moving on. We're now in the home stretch. So, and again, I want to be very clear here. This is not that we have to get resolution. These are just, points. So I think the next one is, as we recognize in the current code itself, and I list point 4 is the defend and indemnification piece. So I think the idea is that we already have a defend and indemnification for officials, whether it is volunteers, council members, and employees. And so we're afforded the right to counsel, seek counsel with an attorney, but this is very specific to cases that get brought to a court, recognizing that. So I just put out there that I think it's worth discussing, or not today, but worth for us, for the idea that, look, the committee has at the moment unfettered resources to do investigation, and as they should. I don't, again, I think that there are reasonable reporting standards that we should have there. But I also firmly believe that if a resident volunteer, is in an investigation, they shouldn't be out on a limb to go into their own pocket if they want some legal support. I also believe that for a council member. Arthur, I know that in the past you've had folks who have, I think, written things up. You've mentioned you've had complaints filed against you. So I think it's reasonable to at least consider, as part of the indemnification and defense, that, look, if we've set this up within our village where you can get investigated, I believe, frankly, that we should also then afford the opportunity for some, for officials, that they should also be able to seek counsel and get some support for that. So I'm sharing that. I'm not asking for a response.
But I just want to be clear that we didn't just set this up. This has been part of the ethics code for years and years and years. So,
Yeah, this is not part of the amendment.
right.
2020.
And it was when the ethics committee was first set up.
Yeah.
Andrew, pardon me. Every time Lori goes to speak, it's impossible to hear her. If she's gonna speak, could she move to a microphone or?
She
could
is right
somebody
next to
give
the
her
microphone, Larry. She's right next to the microphone. Maybe you need to turn up your volume as well.
I can
but
hear
she-
all of the rest of you clearly.
Okay,
Maybe her
well-
microphone's not working right.
No, it's,
Now, Laura, it is hard to hear Lori. I
okay,
can't.
it's one microphone and it's right in front of Lori. So we will,
I will try to speak louder.
Well, maybe she can
I'm
use your
living next-
microphone. We can hear you,
I'm-
Andrew.
It's the same microphone, Larry. Okay, it's one microphone right here. We can scoot over. All right, as we will.
So like I said, I think this is a point for discussion. Just again, I think that there should be some affording of anyone who is going through an investigation. You know, it can cause anxiety, it can cause stress, even though it's going to a court. I think that they should be afforded some opportunity to seek legal counsel and some reimbursement for that. So I'm just putting that out there. 5, I think we already said consistency between the oath and the code. I think that we can follow up on that. I think we're in agreement, and I think that makes good sense. And then finally, I think the conflicts and recusal were covered. I don't think I really need to go with this, only that, you know, as different situations come up, we'll work together on that. So that's all good.
Okay.
So I apologize. There was one more. Let me see if it works. So just, I promise this is real. So all I say is suggested way forward. We continue to have a dialogue on these points. Some I think we have agreed, some we can continue to talk about. I already talked about the idea that in an annual survey, I think it'd be great if we put some
Yeah, we've never
information.
asked a
Yeah.
question about.
Yeah. Great, or volunteerism. And then finally, this is just something I want to put out, and I know Lori and others, you've worked hard on this, and again, I bring this up because currently I am a co-liaison with Arthur on the election committee. And so I know back in November of 2021, because there had been some concern about the possibility of an issue in the, you know, endorsements of council members at the time, and you folks took it up. And then back in June, there was a statement saying the committee considered and rejected recommending, you know, very clearly that council member endorsements or candidates, you know, that was not something that you were going to take up. So I just put this out there because, again, I am a liaison, right, on the election committee. And so maybe this is part of training, and I suggest we could follow up on it. But for me personally, as a liaison to an election committee, and we think of things such as strict impartiality or duty of impartiality, for me personally, to go out and say, I am endorsing this person when I don't know if you would qualify me as an official of the election committee. But for me personally, I need more training on that because I don't know where it begins. And so I list a couple questions here, which to follow up on, which is, you know, first, if it's not a complaint and the committee didn't look at it as a complaint, or maybe conversely, if the committee took this up as a complaint, I think we heard Ron say confidentiality matters. So if this were looked at as a complaint, this would not be discussed at all. Right? This would not be, you would not come out with a determination in public on this. So let's assume that this was not a complaint, but it was an issue of interest. So, you know, with that said, again, for me to follow up, I would be really interested in how, when we look at this issue, if I am doing strict impartiality, how does that not really fall in if I am an election official? So I just want to put that, I'm not asking for a response.
But may I?
Sure,
Yeah, yeah.
please.
Thank you.
And talk about.
May I respond then?
Well, let me just finish real quick. So-
Still on that issue, I'd like to
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to say, so Ron, you're still there? You may have fallen asleep, but Ron, you're usually up with us. Ron, I did have one question for you. So in this particular case, right, so where the Ethics Commission Committee takes up a question that seems as a policy question, and they make a
But
determine.
not a complaint.
But not a
the
complaint.
filing of a complaint.
So again, and it looks like they can do that independently, which is great. You know, if the commission and committee wants to take up policy questions and it's not a complaint, I'm not necessarily saying they shouldn't. But my question to you, Ron, is if they come out with this sort of statement that says the committee considered and rejected recommending a prohibition, and it's a recommendation, that doesn't stop us as a council from perhaps making a policy if we wanted to that said, listen, council members and those who are volunteer residents serving on election committee, you know, shouldn't be endorsing candidates.
We
And
also have the US Constitution.
Exactly.
I was gonna say,
That permits
you're right.
And we didn't just unilaterally decide this. Let me, if I can just take a minute to go through what happened. A number of residents came to a spring ethics committee meeting and raised this. Some of them tried to raise it as a complaint. And they were directed back to the code because the code requires that any complaints are submitted in writing. We did not receive a complaint on the issue. We did receive a letter from a resident. Before we add anything pretty much to our agenda, we discuss it with our council liaison, which we did. We discussed it with Katie at the time, and we took it up as an issue. Niles had been curious about the issue himself and had sought input from Ron. So when we took it up, we had Ron's legal advice to consider, which Ron said, Ron, I don't want to quote you here because you might want to quote yourself here, but you said that it was actually a constituent service to endorse, for council members to endorse. So that's how the whole thing evolved. And that's why we rejected it based on attorney advice and based on what other standards were. We looked at Maryland politicians. Now, we also took up the issue of the election committee is its own entity, so we did not take that up. But we did consider whether the ethics committee, and we had a mixed response on that, should they endorse anyone.
perfect. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm so even more grateful for Andrew because of his patience on this. And this is it. And so I just, you know, I hope we can continue on that. And I bring it up because I am, you know, and Arthur, we're both on this co-liaison. And for me, I feel, you know, I want training on it because when I look at strict impartiality and I serve on the election committee, even as a liaison, it would make me feel very uncomfortable to, even if quote unquote, the determination was there's no issue. I think this is something when perhaps just follow up on, or at least put in training. So that's it. With that said, bravo.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to remove your sharing so we can see everyone on the screen?
I would be delighted. And thank you all. And I appreciate your patience.
No, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Tiffany, most patient and I know you've been eager to make a comment and it might take us back to the first or second order of business, but I apologize for missing your hand.
She may have left.
No, she's there. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Let's see. No, she's not muted.
Maybe she may have gone to bed.
No, she unmuted herself. Okay, well,
Peter has a hand.
yeah, let's go to Peter and then we'll go back to Tiffany first for a second attempt here.
Are they allowed to unmute themselves?
Yeah, I
We
think
might
they've been
be
able to unmute themselves.
Oh, there's Peter.
Yeah,
Peter,
yeah.
there he is.
Hi, Peter.
Hi there. Thank you, Lori, for that really hopeful discussion. And thank you to the council for your careful consideration of this. I do have a couple of points I'd like to make. The first is, Lori, that was a lot to swallow. For some reason, the council continues to have somewhat inadequate sound reproduction technology at its disposal. And I think it would be helpful if you could in some way distribute that document publicly.
We will, Peter. We agreed to submit it as part of the official record here.
Okay, and does that mean that it will be considered before the council moves to a vote on the issue?
No, we're moving to a vote tonight.
I see. It does seem to me that, you know, careful consideration of these issues would require that, you know, there'd be time to actually look at the answers and try to make sense of them.
I've carefully considered.
Yeah. For the council or for you, Peter?
For the council.
Yes, and I think we've all carefully considered this now over the course of many weeks, if not months.
Okay. Second thing, I want to follow up a bit on what Jeff was saying. You know, I appreciate Mark's comments on the matter of recusal. Jeff touched on the issue of the concern that was raised before the committee about Councilmember Fattig endorsing a couple of candidates for the council. So just looking at the statute or the ordinance, 4201A says, before participating on behalf of the village in any debate or determination that may have a reasonable potential or thereafter affecting a public interest, any public official who is subject to this chapter shall have an affirmative duty to disclose in writing to the council and to the committee. Okay, and then going down to 4202A, voluntary recusal. After complying with the disclosure and oath-taking requirements, an official shall either one, voluntarily disqualify or recuse him or herself and withdraw, or two, request that the council, with the assistance of the committee, determine the presence, etc. So it seems to me that that was clearly a matter that in which the committee considered, discussed, and determined that an ethical violation had not been alleged by the various parties who were discussing this, and then acted based on that. And it seems to me that, you know, given the language that I just quoted from the oath, that would have given rise to a duty to recuse, because that was, you were participating on behalf of the village in a debate or determination with the reasonable potential of thereafter affecting public interest. So I don't understand why recusal was not considered here. And, you know, I think there are a couple of people on the ethics committee for whom recusal might not have been a bad option. And one of them, Lori, you know, is yourself. I mean, this was a person that I know, and I think many of us know, to be a good friend of yours. And in that sense, you know, I think it
Excuse
fits
me,
under the
Peter,
impartiality.
I'm gonna object to that, because I don't know that Susan's a good friend of mine. I'm not saying that I'm not friends with her. However, I've known her as liaison to our committee and liaison to the election committee when I served on the committee. She was also the chair when we were on walkability together. But you know, it was funny because her husband was on a meeting one time, and I asked, well, you know, there was someone I didn't know on the meeting, and it turned out to be her husband because I didn't even know his name. So I just take offense to.
It's also beside the point.
Okay, I don't mean any personal offense. for
No,
sure.
I am personally offended. I mean, I'm just going to break in here, Peter, because several times now in the past couple of months, a handful of you all have obliquely accused me of an ethics violation, sometimes directly. Tonight, you actually used my name. Kudos for actually coming right out with it, because I endorsed candidates in the 2020 2021 election. And the candidates were upset. Although it had been done 4 years before I ever endorsed anyone, it was never considered to be a violation of any kind of ethics code or even any standards. Nevertheless, the committee researched it. They determined that I was well within my rights, that it was a constituent service. And yet you all continue to try to make some sort of issue out of it. I find
Peter,
it
more than that, it's a constitutional right.
a constitutional right.
Through an
Exactly.
ethics committee
Yeah.
complaint.
And,
We
and
shouldn't have to have a constitutional lawyer to tell us whether or not we can campaign
yeah,
and
I
endorse.
just want to.
We don't have a Hatch Act here,
In
Peter.
response to Susan, I'd appreciate the opportunity to do that.
If
not-
Peter, just real quickly, if I can just chime in and then I'll let you speak. As someone who was concerned with this, I have come around a little bit, not that I'm gonna endorse anyone for the next election, but while I was upset because of this, like the spirit was to me something that I was upset with, the spirit of the law. There was nothing wrong, and I now actually have changed my opinion on it because it is a matter of freedom of speech, it's a constituent service. But I didn't like it back then. I didn't like it. I still don't. I'm not a big fan, but I accept it. But we're not talking about the 2021 election here, and it's not really germane, this particular issue here, to our discussion, but please continue.
So if I could respond, I have not in any way alleged that Susan committed an ethical violation, and indeed I have no personal view on that matter. I've heard arguments on both sides. I have not made a decision, exactly what I really think is the right thing. I haven't studied it in sufficient detail. All I am alleging is that this was a matter that as I read the code, this seems to me to be a matter that involved a debate or determination with a reasonable potential of affecting a public interest, which gives rise to the obligations in 4201A and 4202A to either recuse or seek consultation on recusal. And in that sense, I think that the recusal provisions, for whatever reason, failed. And Lori, I think, frankly, I really don't mean that there's anything wrong with being a friend of Susan at all. And I didn't mean to say that if somehow that's what you took from it.
Peter, you're making an allegation about recusals and friendships. Jeff said earlier tonight, do we still get to walk? I've also walked with Andrew. I think that is offensive. I think that you don't understand the code. Mark, who is also an attorney, has looked at this at length, and he did weigh in during the ethics committee meeting on this topic. Ron Bolt also weighed in and advised the committee. So I think you're in the minority here in your reading of the code.
Okay, well, I don't see where my failure of understanding, but it does seem to me. So impartiality is defined in 4101C. Impartiality means making decisions based on objective criteria rather than personal bias, prejudice, or favoritism. It requires that officials be fair and not give preferential treatment to any persons or organizations in performing their duties. And so, this creates the impression or the possibility that, that there is favoritism here. And that to me suggests that recusal is appropriate under the terms of the ordinance. I am not suggesting that Susan committed any kind of violation. I don't have an answer to that question. I am not suggesting that there's anything wrong with being friends with Susan. All I'm suggesting is that I continue to think that there are problems with the recusal provisions of the statute.
Okay, I just want to address your 4-101C. Performing their duties on behalf of the village. Okay, that's their official duties. Campaigning for a candidate is not covered under their official duties. Council members get to do what they want. in their own time. They
Yeah,
can
and
go out and endorse
Susan
people.
did not have control, I don't think, over how her endorsement was mentioned on the campaign literature, which was endorsed by the council chair, I think were the words on the campaign literature. That was not something that she could control those candidates adding to their document. I mean, that just goes to official versus personal role.
Well, ask for Ron.
It's not a question of whether Susan was in some way preferential. It's a-
This is not talking to anything that's happening tonight. Let's move on.
Exactly.
Ron, thoughts?
So there is a state ethics commission memo, one from 2014, one from 2017, indicating that this is a constituent service. And when I looked at the issue, I called the attorney, Jennifer Algair, for the State Ethics Commission. And she explained to me that the state commission deems endorsement of a candidate to be a constituent service because it can be useful for voters to know who their elected officials support.
Okay, so that might trump. Whatever else.
Yeah. And I'm not extending it. I just want to say, so first of all, whatever I shared, like, I don't know how it kind of spilled into this, but I brought it up as an example of, I currently serve as liaison in election committee. And while, so for me, I know that we've already determined that council members can campaign, endorse, do what they want. But I feel personally, given this strict impartiality duty, I don't feel comfortable doing it, but we already determined that the committee itself can make their own determination. They did so very legally with all the advice they want, but still, as a council, if we felt that anyone who sits on an election committee, we want to come up with a standard that says, you shouldn't really be campaigning when you serve as an officer on the election committee. That's something we can come up as policy. That doesn't have to be an ethics issue.
It's consistent with the law.
Right, and I think there are different,
Yeah.
and I have to think back to the 2 years I spent on the election committee, but I do think there are different rules that govern that. I just can't
Okay.
recite them as well as I can ethics at this point.
Peter, what else? We have other hands up. So what else, Peter?
No, I'll let it go there.
Okay. I'm gonna try again. Tiffany, I'm sorry. Tiffany's microphone wasn't working. Tiffany, you're back. You're back on deck here.
Twice too.
Yeah. If you want to unmute yourself. Going once.
Tiffany has come and left a couple times. I'm not sure which one.
Okay. Oh, well, unmute them all. Okay, one's unmuted. Tiffany? All right, we're coming back to Tiffany. I believe Marty was first, Larry, and then Ben coming in hot. After that, Naomi. And Susan after Naomi.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, Marty, go.
Okay, thank you very much for this detailed discussion. And thank you for agreeing to make the thing that Lori read part of the official record, because I certainly would like to read that, to have the opportunity to read that, not just have heard it tonight for the first time. And I would encourage the council to not vote tonight. There's no reason you can't do this next month. When, we've all had a chance to kind of absorb what that said. It was very helpful, Lori. I thank you for it. A couple of things here. Again, this is taking an enormous amount of time that we could as a village be spending on more productive things, but I appreciate you spending the time on this because it is important. I completely disagree that this is just a minor change in the ordinance. It would expand its jurisdiction to cover all kinds of residents who have no official duties or positions. And Ron said, I'm quoting you more or less here at the last session on Tuesday.
Marty, can I interrupt you, please? You're wrong about that. It would apply to appointed committee members, not all
Yes.
kinds of people.
Yes, and Arthur, I think you had it right the first time, because I think it would be just awful to put people through. The key here, the thing, let's get past some of the legalese and look at the actual impact of this. Putting volunteers through the process of formal charges of ethics violations and then this formal investigative process, which has good due process provisions in it for sure. But that is a whole big machinery now. It's not simple for a volunteer to respond to it. If they have to get a lawyer, it's going to cost them money. It's certainly going to cost an enormous amount of stress, and emotionally, I think that it would just be devastating to volunteers to apply this to anybody that doesn't absolutely have to apply it to. Let me talk about a simpler solution here. The impetus for this, and Lori's been clear about it, is that there's an inconsistency between what the code says about the oath and what this ordinance says about who it applies to. And that the theory is that anybody who takes the oath has to then be subjected to the possibility of legal charges on ethics violations and turmoil from investigations. That's an incredible thing to put people through. The punishment is not the outcome of the investigation, whether they're found guilty or not. The punishment is the process of putting them through that machinery. And Ron said that typically the normal procedure is that this does not apply to people who do not have what do you call statutory positions of trust, statutory duties. And I don't think we should extend this to apply to anybody, that it doesn't have to, because the process of putting them through the ringer is so painful and hurtful in itself. I mean, it could be devastating to people to be faced to answer charges, and it could be expensive because there's no indemnity now for volunteers where they would have any reimbursement for whatever legal expenses they have. And, I mean, lawyers who handle this stuff are not cheap. So this is an incredible burden. It's not a protection for volunteers. It's a burden to put anybody through this machinery unless it's essential. And I don't think it's essential for anybody other than people who have appointed positions. The whole argument about that, the engagement committee, interviews vendors or helps negotiate. Well, yeah, that's fine. That's their part of their recommendation advisory provision. They're not the ones who make the decisions. And all you really need for those committees and task forces and whatever is a conflict of interest statement. Having them sign the oath is fine. That's just a statement of principle. But signing the oath does not mean they should have to be put through the ringer. This is a meat grinder of a process. And again, for the committee, I appreciate all your due process provisions. They're important. If you're going to do an investigation, you have to do it well. I do investigations professionally. There are some high standards for how you have to conduct them. And in this case, the committee is both the investigator and the judge. So there's especially high standards here in terms of being really careful before you put somebody through this. This is not like a jury where you have, non-expert people making the decision. The function of the committee here is to judge whether a violation is happening.
Pardon me. Andrew, what did you just say? I couldn't hear you.
The council makes the ultimate decision.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
So it's not the jury and the judge. I mean, your judgment is to proceed in alerting the council if something's being reviewed. But I think you've said in the past, Marty, that this has a chilling effect. I don't know who you're talking to about chilling effects. We're all serving here happily and we're all under this code that's in place. And I've yet to hear from anyone that I've spoken to that has thrown his or her name into the process that they're worried about ethical violations. So this cruel and unusual punishment that you speak of, I don't see it. I don't see it. And I think having a mechanism in place that is fair and unbiased is what we all expect it to be. Otherwise, it would be cruel and unusual punishment if it wasn't.
Andrew, I appreciate that. And I'm one of the people who did tell you that having this ordinance the way it is now makes me very hesitant to actually serve on any committee that would, possibly be able to put me through the ringer. And I think that goes back to something Peter said about recusal, because, the recusal provisions in this ordinance really are inadequate. The voluntary recusal does not comply with state standards in terms of mandatory recusal if there's, any impression of possible bias. So the recusal provisions here are not up to state standards. And there's also a provision under state law where parties who are brought into proceedings like this would have the right under state law to request the recusal of any of their, any of their judges, any of their inquisitors. And so that's not in this ordinance. So Peter's got a point there that the recusal provisions here really do need to be strengthened. My point is simpler. If you want the bureaucratic consistency to amend the oath policy and so that it complies with the ordinance, simple thing is not to extend the ordinance to people who would be just devastated if they ever had to go through this process, but to simply amend the oath policy so that both the ordinance and the oath apply only to the volunteers who hold statutory positions of public trust. That's the way to solve this problem. I mean, look at the time we're spending on this again, at the proposal to spend to make
Well,
it cover all
help us
volunteers.
move on, Marty, because we did an hour and 45 minutes at the listening session, and I think public trust is, in my opinion, on any committee. And
On
we
a task
rely
force?
on any volunteer in his or her determination on what actions to take on behalf of a committee. But okay, what else, Marty? Because we have a lot of hands up here.
I'll defer and come back if.
No,
something else
no,
comes
we're
up.
not coming back. We're gonna do one round here because we have so much on this agenda. So we've heard from a lot of folks. We're hearing from the same folks again, but there's no coming back. We're doing one round, please.
All right, I would say, please do not extend this, that there's no need to do that, and that it would subject even more people to that. And I know many people, including myself, who are really hesitant to volunteer under the terms of this, because there are only 3 people on the committee, and it's not entirely clear that they would recuse themselves if it were appropriate. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. And again, that committee and each committee member is subject to this ordinance. So if it's seen that there's any kind of favoritism or unbiased action, they would be subject to that same ordinance. Larry. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank Peter. I was rather surprised a couple of times. One, while Lori was talking, and she said that people were complaining about Susan Faddick's endorsement of other people, but there was no official complaint filed, and so for that reason, they weren't considering it. I found that interesting.
That's not what she said.
That being a technicality. And Lori, if you have something to say, take your turn. You've talked a lot tonight. The next thing is that Peter pointed out that there's inconsistencies in the ordinances that we have and the freedom of speech, which obviously the freedom of speech is the paramount thing. However, why didn't the Ethics Committee figure out how to correct the ordinances so that there wouldn't be that conflict? And why didn't it dawn on them to do that? The idea also that we can take, if there's any issue that other committees have fiduciary responsibilities or public trust responsibilities, then take them out of those committees. Put them solely on the Elections Committee, the Ethics Committee, and the council and the employees of the council, so that people can volunteer to decide to have a picnic without worrying about whether something can affect them in other ways. And Andrew, your comment that there are volunteer people have not run, etc. Do you remember that when we had the second round of discussions, I literally said, anyone that wants to vote for me, please vote for Andrew. One of the reasons I did that is I have a security clearance, and I looked at those new ordinances that were coming up and talked to a lawyer about it and decided that it was not in my interest to volunteer. And there is recently someone who was asked to vote to work on a committee, turned down for the same reason. So your comment that it isn't affecting things is not true. It is very much affecting things. Excuse me. I want to finish what I'm saying since you're so impatient that we get done.
I'm not interrupting you.
Excuse me.
I was not interrupting you.
Excuse me. I also find it absolutely amazing that there's not a single thing about when a person files a complaint that's frivolous or erroneous, if there's any penalties against them for doing such a thing. If you file a frivolous lawsuit, there's certainly penalties. How come there isn't something about that in the ordinance to protect people from that kind of activity going on? I totally, absolutely think that this is expanding something that doesn't need to be expanding. I think it's oppressive. I think it causes people not to participate in government. Okay, I think it's a huge mistake.
Thank you, Larry. And knowing folks that have volunteered with TS/SCI clearance, there are some that don't want to and are told not to or recommended not to, and others that are not, and happily serve. So,
What's
moving
that got
on.
to do with, what's that got to do with the statement that you said it wasn't affecting volunteerism, and I just
That's what
showed
I'm,
you that it did?
exactly, that's
It's
exactly
affecting
what I'm responding to.
volunteerism, and I showed you
Larry.
2 cases where it did, Andrew.
Larry, in
I'm-
terms, there may be individuals who have chosen not to volunteer, but in terms of total numbers, the number of volunteers is as high as it's ever been. Back even
If that's the
before we
case,
had
then
an
why
ethics
do you
committee.
have committees that are hamstrung by having only 3 members when they need 5 to be actually effective in governing?
We
That-
chose. we
Answer me
chose to
that.
appoint three.
That's your opinion, Larry.
No, that's not my opinion.
Yes,
That's
it
a-
is your
that-
opinion.
okay.
Can I just say this? What does that have to do with it? Your question when you said there are
Because you
folks that
don't
are
get
not
the
running-
vol-
Listen, Larry, I know you're as pleasant as always. When you say there are folks that are not volunteering because of their security clearance, I'm telling you, there are people that are volunteering with security clearances and are not avoiding this, and the ability to volunteer because of their security clearance. So there's some that do and some that don't, but it has nothing to do with their security clearances, I don't believe. Maybe for you it did, others it's not. Moving on. Thank you, Ben.
Hi, first I'd like to say thank you. This has been very, we'll say entertaining. It's helped me distract from the fact that my 10-year-old son is beating me in bracket, NCAA tournament. I'd like to start it off and say I do have a top secret SCI clearance, and the ethics ordinance has not stopped me from volunteering. I also like to point out that I've served on the ethics committee, although briefly, and I would like to, I would say congratulate Lori, Mark, and Alex. I mean, they've done a great job, and have been quite villainized for their efforts. Susan, I would like to apologize to you. When I made my comments, I saw you like make a facial expression. I thought you were rolling your eyes. However, I saw you make a similar facial expression when someone was supporting you. So I'm sorry. I'm getting my, you know, I go to one of these meetings a year, so I might as well get my money's worth. I feel like a council member's right to pick a person, to choose somebody who they're going to vote for and endorse a candidate is a First Amendment right. I think that should be fully supported by the residents as well as the council, as long as they don't do it as part of official business. And then here's where I'm going to settle Trojan horse it, which I probably shouldn't have announced. Going off of something Ron said earlier, where he worried about property voters having equal protection right. I would like to point out that we allow non-citizens to vote. That in and of itself could create an equal protection right. As a matter of fact, there's a case in New York right now that actually overturned the rights of non-citizens to vote. I believe non-citizens should vote. I believe property rights should vote. I believe everyone should vote. But that's me. I'm from New York. I believe we should vote often and early and often. That's all I have to say. Enjoying this.
Thank you,
Princeton
Ben.
sucks. Take over my bracket.
I thought that was a Jersey thing, the vote early and often.
And Ben, this is Laura. I just really want to thank you for your comments. I really appreciated them tonight.
We're gonna give Tiffany one last chance, because she's been so patient. Tiffany, this is all or nothing. All right. Yeah, no, I don't think so. Try
She
taking-
could message me, but no, she
Yeah,
hasn't.
I've texted her and she's trying. I hope she's had some issues. Okay. Sorry, Tiffany. Holly.
Sorry, hi.
Hi.
I just want to say that it seems like a solution without a problem, or a solution in search of a problem. And I know so many people have worked hard, and I appreciate everyone volunteering, but there's just a feeling of overreach here, and a feeling that we're doing something that other villages aren't doing. And when I asked Ron at the listening session what other villages had committee members be part of an ethics obligation, I don't think I asked that question quite that way, and Ron can correct that. It was a couple counties in a couple states in the United States and nobody else had this. So,
Non-statutory, I think was the question. Holly.
Non-statutory.
yeah, well, yeah, I'm not sure. But it just seems like we're just putting a lot of rules in place when we aren't having the problem. So I've lived here a long time. I've never seen the need for this, and I don't see it now. And I do think it has a chilling effect on me, certainly volunteering. I just want to add one thing. This isn't about who likes each other and who doesn't. None of this is personal. This is just doing business and talking. It's not personal for me anyway. I don't have any personal feelings toward anyone here. I'm just speaking my mind about my thoughts on this, and I hope you won't approve it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Holly. I do hope you have some personal feelings for some of us. That I hope you like me as a
Yeah,
neighbor.
when you stalk me
But,
on Connecticut Avenue.
yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for your comments, and I do hope this goes back to the conversation of factions and favoritism and all that, and I understand there are folks that have very different policy positions, but I also know there's personal animus among and between, and I desperately hope we can move on, but it seems to have been very difficult in the many years that I've lived here as well. Naomi, please.
I want to go back to what Holly just asked and relating to a question she posed to Ron. Can you clarify for us, Ron, what other jurisdictions have this kind of an ordinance and how do they manage without it if they don't?
So I didn't do a global search. I
I'm talking
provided
about,
comments.
let me just clarify. You work with a whole lot of jurisdictions locally, so you're familiar with those at least.
That's right, yeah. So I responded as to what's common based on my experience among the other 9 municipalities I represent, and that I did look at some other jurisdictions, I think in Arizona, Florida, and somewhere else. And as I said at the listening session, it is uncommon for non-statutory committee members to have a oath of impartiality.
So can you define what you mean by non-statutory and how it applies, for example, to the Community Engagement Committee?
Sure. So for example, in Martin's Additions, the election committee and ethics committee and tree supervisor are established by code. So that's what I mean by statutory committees or officials. And then there are ad hoc committees or standing committees that aren't created by statute. They're created by resolution and charter by the councils.
And were created later in the process, some of them as well, Ron, or?
Yes, yeah.
Is Chevy Chase Village one of the jurisdictions that does have this in place?
They're not a client of mine, and I can't say off the top of my head what they do. I mean,
I think Lori says that she
It's one of the only documents I didn't print out to verify, but when I remember reading it, it said that all appointments. are
all
subject
appointments,
To their ethics.
all appointments, okay.
So this is,
well, yeah, to that, Mr. Chairman, I didn't give you a complete answer. Chevy Chase Village and the town of Chevy Chase are not exempt from the state ethics law. So those two jurisdictions have adopted the model law written by the state, which does apply to all appointees.
Okay. Okay.
But that ordinance regulates conflicts of interest and not necessarily an oath of service.
Okay, that makes sense.
so in your opinion, this is relatively uncommon, what we're considering here.
It is uncommon based on my experience, but as I've said before, laws are often reactive, they're often scar tissue, and the village is responding to events in the village.
Events? Okay,
I'm not going to get into it. We've
I understand.
We've
you.
exhaustively discussed that at prior meetings.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Susan?
Hi, thanks. So I also just think that expanding the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee to cover everyone who volunteers, including these non-statutory positions, it seems like an overreach. I agree with what was said before about that. And I really agree with, well, I am taking in what Ron has just told us, that this is uncommon. It is not typically done. And I think there's been a lot of resident concern about it. 33 people signed a recent letter about it. There's very specific stuff that was in that letter and that was said at the forum that are ways forward that I think can both satisfy the concern to make sure everyone's abiding by certain standards, and also allow an awareness that some people are concerned and it could affect volunteerism, and it's unclear that it's necessary, and these situations could be handled in a different way. So I would just, really think about ways of compromise and joining in and being respectful of the concerns that residents have raised. And it's easy to kind of quickly discount certain concerns, one of which was raised about the credibility of people on the ethics committee. If you're upholding standards about impartiality, we're going to expect that you're going to recuse yourself if it appears that there would be some conflict of interest or a bias, for example. So I think it would be helpful to add to the training materials examples of if a person on the ethics committee itself was a close friend of someone about whom you were considering a case. Okay, if you were, would you recuse yourself? I would say that would be a textbook case where you would. If you were specifically endorsed by someone about whom, politically endorsed by that person, so you had kind of a political connection, and then you're considering a case related to that person, should you recuse yourself? I would say that's a textbook case where you should. And so when it was brought up earlier about a case that involved a council member a few years ago, it seemed that people were not aware what the person was driving at there was not the outcome of the policy that it is okay to endorse someone. That is not what that question was about. It was about the process by which ethics committee members chose not to recuse themselves when there could easily be the appearance of bias and partiality. Again, if you could add perhaps to your training materials for the future, at least, if you don't think that that was relevant in the past, or for some reason you think that you're not biased when you consider a case, and I say consider a case, I mean, have the conversations to choose to handle this by talking to the attorney and then saying that this is the policy. That should be done by someone else, or it can appear biased. And so I think that goes towards credibility, and it goes toward maybe there's a standard that people on the ethics committee could have for others, but not for yourselves. And so for you to enhance your credibility, I would encourage a more rigorous approach to your own recusal in those cases. So I think that was just something I wanted to hear. Andrew mentioned anyone on the ethics committee would be subject to the same ordinance. Well, if that's the case, who would hold them accountable? Who would subject them to that? Is the council willing to provide any kind of oversight over the cases that are heard? I mean, it sounds to me like there's not any kind of cap on legal fees, as Jeff proposed. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that it makes sense that cases, I think part of the problem here is that we've talked about ethics cases and where ethics cases should go. I think we should be talking about more generally when there's a concern about conflict or that could be ethical, that could be social, we don't know what. When there's concerns about cases, they could be brought, any case should be brought, a complaint about residents, or about committee work, should be brought first to the council. And then the council can refer, oh, this is related to ethics. Okay, that'll go to the ethics committee. Oh, this is a basic conflict per employee to resident. Okay, maybe we'll do some conflict resolution. So I think that would be an approach that might comfort more residents to feel that the council was actually playing some role and maybe providing some awareness or oversight about what cases are bubbling up to the surface. Because again, to me, it feels like there's carte blanche for what this committee does. I've heard people on this committee repeat the idea there's no evidence that the ethics ordinance has affected voluntarism. When people have again and again come to the ethics committee, we've said this sort of thing, people have written it. In the hearing the other day, multiple people mentioned it. I cannot believe that anyone in this room or on this call right now would say it has not affected voluntarism, when a number of us have said first person, it is affecting our serving on your committees. And yet, so I feel that people on the ethics committee who continue to say that, I mean, there is no evidence that it has affected voluntarism. If anyone can write to our village manager and get the survey feedback for this year and read through it, and you'll see how many people have said they're concerned about serving on a committee because of the ethics ordinance, the ethics committee, et cetera. So there is concern about that. I wish it would not be dismissed. This is not about one person disliking another. No matter if you try to say that, fine. But we're all dealing with governmental situations and policies. When you reduce the credibility of somebody, you're also reducing what they represent. So by saying that somebody who was a chair of the election committee for a number of years cannot serve or will not serve on certain committees, you're also alienating the elections process that she represents, the approach to elections. These are about policies. It's not just a drama of one person disliking another, from my perspective. So anyway, I think there's some very legitimate objections that were brought up and concerns that could make your ethics ordinance and committee a stronger committee with stronger provisions for recusal. And also, if you could add to the training materials instances, for example, of interfering with election communications. That's one of the issues that was brought up a couple of years ago. And I don't know that that's a part of your training materials, Lori, but if you could bring that up, that would be useful, because it may be that council members themselves and others don't know what it means to interfere with election communications. So all of these things can help us as a community to move forward. But I think we need to be honest and not just cherry pick what we want to be prosecuted or focused on as a concern, if we want to feel that you're truly neutral and have some credibility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I think that this training manual, for lack of a different term, is a living document and can always be updated and refined. I mean, this is like the first round of it. So I think I would encourage the ethics committee to, when issues are raised, to kind of include, if appropriate, in the training.
And we are discussing, especially since we'd like to do it every year. So even if you're a volunteer and you've been through it, we're inviting them
To come back.
And
Yeah.
so we understand that we do need to refresh the scenarios. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we're not including the ethics committee is very limited in its mandate. We're not going to include issues in there that are not covered by either the duty of impartiality or a conflict of interest.
Hey, Andrew.
Oh, Tiffany. Hallelujah. And I'm going to let you speak in a second. I just wanted to say one other thing. I don't think anyone here on the council, especially myself, I don't think we want to downplay any person who feels like this has a chilling effect or is not volunteering because of it. What I just meant to say is, in my conversations with folks that are considering to run for, or to consider committee appointments, it has not been raised and has not been considered, but it's on every single person that decides not to, that's one too many people. I get that, Susan, 100%. Tiffany,
Thank you guys for your patience. Device number 4 seems to be working. Hopefully, I'll run through my list, starting with ethics. I served as a senior government official, and I served as a Village of Martin's Additions council member and committee volunteer, and was not concerned about the ethics code. They were not burdensome. I agree that the removing of the notary requirement will actually relieve some of the administrative process that we had that took a little bit longer. So I just want to encourage the council to introduce and go forward, as has been shown by the many discussions and PowerPoints this evening. There has been a long process. There have been additional extra procedural opportunities for people to speak. And I think, the policy process needs to move forward with an introduction. And if folks have continued comments, then they can do that as part of the hearing that you would have. 2 quick other things, election committee and community engagement committee, very excited to hear about the celebration on the sidewalk. There's a chance that I could be back there in May. Don't know, but I really think there's a difference between casting our vote in person, especially for our kids to see it, and me filling out my ballot at the kitchen table. That's my personal experience. So I'm glad to hear that the celebration on the sidewalk might be happening again. Encouraging, I read through the packet for the charter amendment. Thank you for the highlighted section from the town of Somerset. I think that might address the concerns that I raised, as well as the another example that was given at the latest election committee meeting. Real people, real examples, and just helpful to have that clarity so there's no confusion going forward. And then budget discussion, at no surprise to the council members, but I encourage other residents who are on the call. I've encouraged the council to consider giving a tax rebate, as one of our neighboring jurisdictions is doing. They do that for, goes straight to the property tax bills. There have been no legal challenges in the many years that this has been done publicly. And my rough math on last year's surplus, not dipping into reserves, not even using all of the surplus from last year, would be that it's about a $1,600 per residence rebate potential. And I'll just use the examples that I've used before. There's been discussion about funding nonprofits like Chevy Chase at Home. You guys had a discussion earlier about Shepherd Park, and how that was done in the past was residents took their own money, gave money to the parks.org, the nonprofit, and then in 2020, that money was used to plant trees in the park. So again, if you, the council, were to consider and pass a tax rebate, then if residents chose, they could give that money to whatever nonprofit or whatever service provider they wanted to use, and march forward. So I really encourage you guys, again, tax rebate keeps you out of picking winners and losers. You've already got 2 requests for funding nonprofits. Thank you very much.
thank you, Tiffany. All right, now the question on the table is the possible adoption of ordinance number 2022-10-1 to amend the ethics ordinance to expand the definition of official to include members of all committees and ad hoc committees appointed by the council. Who would like to move for a vote?
I will move to vote for this ethics amendment.
Do we have a second? Susan seconds. All in favor, say aye.
I to introduce.
No, I
To adopt.
I to adopt.
I to adopt.
I to adopt, right, sorry.
Okay.
Right.
I to adopt.
Wait a minute, that was, this is the final vote?
Yes.
Oh, no. Let me.
What?
No, I will have a statement to make.
Okay.
Before adopting. After listening to many different discussions here, I've gone through and I tried to line up the arguments for and against. The arguments for treats all appointees uniformly, places all complaints under established procedures that provide due process, confidentiality, and timeliness. It includes appointees with real financial responsibilities, and specifically referring to the Community Engagement Committee, who choose, negotiate, and commit VMA to specific vendors, even though 2 council members signed the checks. That we can't get away from the fact that that committee makes decisions that have financial repercussions. Arguments against. Council has authority to remove any appointee. So the council could do this on its own. Other municipalities don't do it. And I would suggest this is a caution. It's not an argument against. As Ron has suggested, there may be all kinds of history in other people's, in other jurisdictions that they don't do it. But it raises a question. It increases the government structure. Do we need to have more complicated government? There are specious arguments against. Nothing has happened that warrants an extension. We don't go around, we don't usually say we wait for the crime to occur before we act on it. We did a financial review, even though our money hadn't disappeared. We did a cybersecurity review before we had a ransom attack. So the idea that because nothing has happened, that we're just out there looking for something that has no validity to it at all. It would reduce the number of volunteers. Some do not serve, but when you look at the total numbers, the numbers of volunteers are as high or higher than they've ever been. Back before there was an ethics committee, we had essentially the ethics and election committee. I was on the phone trying to twist people's arms to get 3 volunteers, having to call up, going down the list, person by person by person. And we had a few people who finally came forward and served for a long time. Now we have many more volunteers. Maybe not as many as we would have without this, but many of them. The committee engagement, the Community Engagement Committee does not have financial authority. They don't sign the checks, but they make the choices. And whether it's the food truck or somebody else, they are making choices. Government overreach. Good government does not overreach. If there's something that ought to be done, if there's something that we should be doing, it's not overreach. It's within our scope. And finally, there is a presumption of bias among ethics committee members that I find not only offensive, but wrong. The other thing that really strikes me, this isn't really a big deal. This is a really small thing. So given all that, I come down, I am voting no against the resolution. Taking everything under consideration, adding up the pros and the against, largely because of the reason I was against the original enlargement of it. I don't think we need the extension of government. So that I emanate.
Okay, so we have to start this again because you moved. Oh, you moved to
I
a vote.
I
Okay,
just moved to a vote.
Susan seconded. Okay,
Right.
so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Susan,
Susan and me, did you say aye or no aye?
No, I didn't.
Okay, against? 3, okay, so the amendment does not pass, the ordinance does not pass. Okay,
and let me say, I just find so many of the arguments unconvincing, specious, silly, and unconvincing. But I have my own reasons.
okay, sounds good. Moving on to moving on to the pot. Well, this is what good government is all about. We had a listening session, we had hours of this, and an unexpected vote, and everyone will move on in their lives, and I don't think there's hopefully no hurt feelings. Now as to the possible adoption of resolution number 2023-1 to amend policy regarding the taking of oaths and disclosure of conflicts of interest to remove the requirement for a notary to administer the oath. Is there discussion or does someone want to move to a vote?
I'll move to vote.
Okay, do we have a second? Arthur, all in favor, say aye. Aye. That's 4 against.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
The only reason why I hesitate on this, and I think that we have some concurrence, is in the oath itself, it has that strict impartiality versus what we have, which is duty of impartiality. And so, you know, it's just a principle on that. With that said, when it comes to the notary, Ron, you're still awake?
Yeah.
Sorry, friend. I just had a real quick question for you. Thank you, our extremely well-dressed friend. The quick question I had for you was, if someone still wants to do a notary, they can for whatever reason. It's just, you know, if they don't, they don't. Is that the case?
Well, technically, yes, but I guess
There's a reason only because, again, we're talking about some of these things in terms of investigations and charges. So I mean, you know, someone may just technically say, you know what? I want to have a notary. It makes me feel good that I
yeah, someone can always have that option if they want.
With that said,
You're an aye.
Yeah.
Okay,
Wait,
unanimous.
So again, Katie moved,
Katie
who
moved.
seconded?
Arthur seconded and Susan voted aye as well.
I did, yes.
Thank you.
And let's note that I think this might have been Jeff's first I vote on an ethics matter. So that's notable.
All right, moving on. Okay, so I'm not sure on this next one, the discussion and possible introduction of a charter amendment to amend section 301 of the Village of Martin's Additions Charter. I don't know if we need to have much discussion on this right now. I think we had some of that earlier in our conversation. So, but we do have to introduce.
So where are we on that tonight? Introducing it?
Yes.
Okay.
And before we move forward, maybe Ron, can you talk about the process for a charter amendment? And because it's slightly different than a normal ordinance, it's not just 30 days, it's 45 days and the other
Sure,
requirements.
yeah, and there's no obligation to introduce tonight. If the council wants to have a public hearing at the next meeting, then you'd introduce tonight. But if you feel like you want to do more discussion first, you could delay the introduction.
In
But
order
as
to
Michael noted,
in order to have a listening session, we have to introduce it, is what you're saying?
no, you do not.
Okay, all right, well, let's table it. Should we just
Okay.
table this and then have a listening session and then continue on with that conversation?
as long as you don't feel the house is going to burn down.
No, yeah. All right, we'll table that and then Michael, let's work on a listening session in this regard. No urgency in that regard. All right, the budget.
Okay, budget. No treasurer's report tonight, only the budget. A couple of things. If you go, cast your mind back to last year, there was a discussion of the property tax and the what's the other one called?
Personal tax.
And utility.
Personal property tax. And the question was, we dropped the property tax down to a very small, very low level that would raise like $100 on a $1 million house. And people said, well, why not drop it to zero? So this year we are suggesting dropping it to zero. The amount of lost revenues will be $15,000. There's also the personal property tax, which is paid by a home business when they file their state income tax, and the state automatically sends that money to us. And again, a number of residents said, why am I paying this tax? And we said, we really never focused on it. And again, last year, the discussion was, let's drop it to zero. So we are proposing this year that both the personal property of a home business and the real property tax be dropped to zero. Among the revenues, the amount coming from the state income tax has held up remarkably well despite the collapse of the stock market and not a recession, but a weakening economy. And we don't have no idea where it's going to go next year. So we're guessing where that might be. It's a pure guess. It could be up or it could be down depending on the stock market, depending on the economy. The one other item that really popped up in the revenues was interest. Interest payments, our interest receipts. Remember back in the day when interest rates were 0.001%, and we got very small amounts of interest on the large amounts of money that people keep pointing to in our bank accounts. Now the money is starting to roll in as interest rates go up. And so this year, it's a very rough guess. We are putting in $80,000 as potential interest income. It could be more than that if interest rates keep going up. But in the last few weeks, the interest rates on 10-year government bonds have fallen by 0.5%. So we really don't know. Again, it's a guess. But 80,000 compared to 100 is a major change in our revenues. Okay, expenditures. You can look down at the line items. We are reducing some expenditures. Michael managed to empty out our storage rental unit. We made some items that were more in keeping with the actual expenditures. We aren't actually cutting the police. We just modified it so that it was in line with our expenditures. We are adding one item here that is going to require council discussion, and that is adding a part-time employee in addition to the assistant manager to oversee contracts and contractors. This is under the manager's suggestion, and I think it deserves more detailed council discussion. And it will also involve offloading some responsibility from other contract employees. So this is we're introducing it now. We should be going into closed session on a personnel issue at the next meeting to further discuss things. Capital expenditures, there's a whole number of projects in the works for this coming year. The sidewalk on Brookville, if it goes forward, any word?
No, they said they would get it back to me this week and they haven't yet.
Okay, we have the proposals into the State Highway Administration. Hopefully, they're going to approve the plans that the traffic group has put together. We have the widening of down at Quincy Street to allow emergency vehicles. We are going to talk to our former streetlight engineer to help us fill in dark spots. Larry Wasson talked about some of the drainage issue, the storm drainage issue, and we are working with other municipalities to upgrade with WSSC the storm drain on Taylor Street. And that would come out of our ARPA funds. And also the traffic group had engineered curb extensions on a number of streets entering Martin's Addition that were intended to slow down and perhaps eliminate through traffic. That was in the original, it was in the walkability study proposal. It was engineered by the traffic group. We never moved forward with it. And so we want to bring that up again and look into that as another capital expenditures. On Tiffany's, a suggestion again about remitting funds. The legalities of that do not look good. We have asked our own lawyer to look into it. By chance, I've talked to some lawyers. It turns out to be a cousin of mine, who used to be the chief counsel for the county council, and raised it with him. He said that's clearly illegal. These are monies spent by the county or by the state for municipal operations. If you are to do something else other than that, it would be violating the provision of those funds. And so acting on both our own counsel and on other legal advice, we are not pursuing that matter.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question on that point?
Yeah, Tiffany, is that you? Okay,
Yes. The Village of Martin's Additions does not separate revenue streams. So as money comes in, money is spent. It's spent on parties.
right, it goes into one big
staff
pot.
salary. Yes.
And who's,
yes.
okay, can I interrupt, Tiffany? It goes into one big pot, and who's to say that this dollar comes from the county and that dollar comes from the state? I don't know. I take your argument. I don't have absolutely no idea on the legality of that.
And again,
Yeah.
this has been happening very publicly in a neighboring jurisdiction for many years.
Yeah, well, let's
And
find out.
as our
how many
legal
more.
counsel has said, there have been no challenges, none.
Yeah, right. And well, here's the argument that I got from the former county council. That if another municipality started doing it, it would very quickly capture their attention. And we could expect some action on their part.
Is that a former?
But
council?
this is all hearsay. There's nothing.
Right.
solid there.
Okay,
Right. So again, based on facts, no legal challenge.
all right.
Never separated revenue streams and spent money on things like welcome bags and
Sidewalk
mugs.
celebrations.
all of it, election vendors. So again, I encourage the council. I see that you have some new spending
Oh,
proposed.
I forgot to mention the new spending.
Oh, yes, Arthur.
3 items are in that list. Aging in place, which we talked about last year. This would be for residents membership in an organization like Chevy Chase at Home. Sidewalk snow shoveling on request and composting on request.
Again, these are proposals.
These are proposals.
This is not, I mean, this is, Arthur's never gonna stop including the aging in place part in the budget, so we'll live with that until.
Thank goodness.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the laugh.
And we will vote on that at some point.
Yeah. So, okay, I think, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay, so the point here is just for introduction.
This is
This is not
introducing.
passage,
It will
the
be-
beginning of the conversation.
It will be adopted at the annual meeting, which should take place before May 15th.
Okay,
So we have to change our May.
all right.
meeting.
Could I just request that before we take a vote on that budget, we actually find out whether there is any resident need for those scholarships to Chevy Chase at Home? Because when I talked with Arthur and some others about the actual need, it was very indeterminate. And it seems like Chevy Chase at Home apparently has scholarships available.
They
There's
don't. I talked to, they have absolutely 0 scholarships available.
Someone did invite them to the brunch. Weren't they at the brunch? That little table at the brunch? Did I?
I didn't.
And let me
Maybe it was
just,
a different event.
just a quick question. This is an introduction, right?
Right.
So there's
This
more
is an
time
introduction.
to
Yes.
discover, investigate.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But I just,
Susan-
last time I got hit for not saying it loudly and so at the introduction. And so this time I just want to make sure that everybody
Yeah.
knows.
Yeah, Susan, on the survey, one of the questions was, if this were adopted, would you take advantage of it? And 10 people said yes.
And presumably they only answered once each.
Ron?
Yeah.
You have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. 2 quick comments for your consideration. First, if you zero out real property tax,
Yeah.
the county will likely also zero out your tax duplication payment. The county will take the position that there's no duplication in taxes if you've zeroed out your real property tax with respect. Okay. And secondly, your ARPA funds need to be obligated by December 2024.
Right.
And so I would recommend that in the budget, you put an asterisk next to the items, the specific dollar amounts that you're going to
Okay.
fund with ARPA, so that you can document that those funds are actually obligated by the deadline. Because
so
we've only got 2 budget cycles left.
So, Ron, so we should put it in a line item with designated ARPA funds. And if we reduce the property taxes down to a minimum, how many decimal points do they go? Or is there a minimum?
No, I don't think there is. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to reconsider that.
Oh, no, I know there's
Ron,
not. Yeah.
Ron, there is. Remember, we discussed this before. I think it's 0.05.
Oh, okay. I don't remember that, Larry, but thanks for bringing that up. I'll look into that.
Okay.
Okay, again, this is just a draft to start this conversation and the discussion. So I would like, if someone would want to move to introduce. Jeff moves, anyone second? Jeff,
Andrew, I have a question.
Oh, sorry, there's a
well,
hand.
Sorry, Andrew, I'd like to ask a question before you move. I'd like to see a proposal or an estimate of what it would cost to shovel all the sidewalks in the village. It's
Yeah, we
okay.
did that. It would be roughly double the.
I have it. I
the
got
road.
it this week.
Oh, you did get something.
What is it then?
So for a moderate storm of around 4 inches of snow, under 25 houses is $4,000
but-
per
but-
shoveling.
Yeah,
To
but
do the
for-
entire village is, for again, a moderate storm is around $25,000 per storm.
per storm.
But that's that's every sidewalk in the village.
Okay, so did you hear that, Naomi? Should I repeat that?
I heard that, and I would like to propose that we consider putting that in the budget, because just because one person is able or is assisted
Well,
in
Naomi,
shoveling.
I put in a snow shoveling on request. Not.
No,
for-
I know you
for
did.
village.
I know you did, but that's not what I'm asking for.
Right. A
I'm
lot of people
asking,
like to shovel. I particularly
I
do
do.
not want somebody shoveling my sidewalk.
Yeah,
I
no,
like
but-
to shovel.
Well, let Naomi finish.
well, come shovel our driveway then. So
Yeah,
here's the
that's-
thing. Here's the thing. Just because one or two people request on a block to be assisted to shovel their sidewalk, doesn't mean that the whole street, the whole sidewalk block would be shoveled. And that does not make for a safe walking space.
It is a
That's my point.
responsibility of, this would, as Ben would know, this is a responsibility of the resident, of the property owner.
Okay.
Yes,
so-
I know, but it doesn't always work. Anyway,
Okay,
I
so-
think we can.
That is
afford it.
true. It is included in the village ordinance as responsibility of the property owner. Thank you for the shout out, Arthur.
Yeah, so Naomi, your point is taken. I think, again, this is just a discussion point. I think we
Got
can continue this conversation and we've
Yeah.
had it. But I do agree that look, if we're encountering a winter with half a dozen storms, that's a significant line item, but at the same time, if we encounter that same winter and we do this based on resident requests, and, you know, we have volunteers as well. I like shoveling, my neighbors' sidewalks who are elderly, but.
Good
not
to know,
everyone has that.
Andrew. I
Yeah,
might
well,
call upon you.
And when I say neighbors, I mean, you know, within a half a block. I know. Anyway, I appreciate that, Naomi, and we will definitely continue that conversation. We had Jeff move to introduce.
I move.
Okay, and we had Arthur was the second
Oh,
to
the budget.
to introduce the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. I can't see your hand, Susan, but it looked like it was coming up.
Andrew, I'm so sorry.
yeah.
Just a very quick point. I would just put for consideration, Arthur, if you'd like. I know we're having a listening session on the code. I'm not sure if that would take up the whole time, but the possibility of maybe including in that the budget. Or however, only because I know a lot of folks like to talk budget and it might also take a little steam out of the next meeting. There are a lot of folks, I think, that have ideas on proposals, and so I just put it out.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm happy to make it a twofer. I think I ran on listening sessions. And I'm happy for them.
Better deliver.
Yeah, right. All right, the next one is obviously dear to my heart and another council member's heart. It's a discussion and possible vote to sign on to a resolution prepared by the town of Chevy Chase condemning anti-Semitic acts. I think we feel pretty strongly that this is something we should be on record to support. Does anyone want to have a discussion about it, or does anyone want to move
So
to?
what is it that we're actually moving to do?
It's page 75
75.
in the packet.
Right, I saw this, but what are we moving?
We're just moving to sign on to this.
Oh, okay. Oh. Okay, yeah, I saw.
Well, I mean, I think,
I don't know.
yeah,
There
the
is a commitment to host events as well. But you're signing on in support and committing to take certain steps, just so everyone's
that's
aware.
fine. I think that's great. We should. It's developing an anti-Semitism awareness public education program and initiative of Montgomery County municipalities. Okay, it's in the meeting packet.
Right.
It was prepared by Tom City.
Correct.
That's right.
Correct, yep.
That's right.
Councilmember Joel Rubin.
Oh, by Joel Rubin? Okay.
If I'll just say a word, I mean, my day job, you know, let's just put, there's a lot of efforts that we do around disenfranchised populations, and, you know, so this is very meaningful to me. And then with this said, not to say that I'm equating anti-Semitism with disenfranchisement, but I do want to just put out there that there has been a rise not only in anti-Semitism, but I think we have seen, unfortunately, around LGBTQ. And most alarming, we're seeing it unbelievably in elementary schools and middle schools.
Yep.
And so knowing neighbors and dear friends who live not only in VMA, but close by, I just feel that this is, you know, again, I know we all of us feel the same way, but I just want to thank Ron and Michael for, you know, bringing this up and driving this. And I just want to thank everyone for that.
And I know we have a lot of community members who work on these issues. I have one living with me, so she can help us in putting together some awareness campaign as well in all of her free time, which I don't think exists, but so again, moving, Jeff.
Introduce.
And second is Katie's gonna second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I think it's unanimous. Yes, thank you. Managers reports. Mr. Silverman.
Yes, I'll keep it short. It's already late. I just want to thank you all. I know this is a big meeting. I know we've had like 3 long meetings in a row, so appreciate all your work. And the fact that this community, besides for me, is run by volunteers is incredible. So thank you all for your leadership
You're
and
welcome.
support. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're all very supportive, and the community brunch event was such a success, and I feel very welcomed, and everyone's so gracious towards me and towards Aaron. We really appreciate it. So I'll say that. And then I have tried to list out the accomplishments and the things I'm doing and be in constant communication with the council, but also with the residents. I put that in the newsletter. My first 90 days accomplishments and the things I'm looking forward to coming up. My manager's report that I wrote today updates that slightly. And also I have, you know, some hopes for my career to really accomplish some things. And, you know, it was said on this call tonight that there's a lot of, you know, loose ends and issues that have come up and recommendations that have been made over and over again. And I think we need to start checking some of these things off the list. So I'm really hoping that in the next fiscal year, especially, we can actually get to some of those large projects and really start tackling some of those things. Let's stop talking about them and start doing them. So back to basics, get this community running like a fine-tuned machine, and then start taking on some of the big projects. That's
Michael,
kind of my mission.
moving into Martin's Additions and running for council. That's what, that's not like the
Say no.
campaign. Is that appropriate?
If there's any numbers on the Taylor Street storm sewer project.
Yeah, that one I
And if
still
there
need to
any
follow up
costs.
on. The curb extensions I still need to follow up on. I'm following up on, we're reviewing the widening Quincy RFP next week with the village engineer, and then I'm gonna have Ron review that as well before we post it. The sidewalk, you know, is on a specific timeline on down Brookville Road. Every day I drive by that, and walk down that sidewalk, and it's a hazard, and I think that should be the top priority in this
Yeah,
village.
it is, right.
But
I need it for a line item, put a line item in the budget.
Oh,
For
I
the
see,
Taylor
I see.
Street, the numbers, some number, I need a number.
Okay.
One thing, Katie, I know that you made a visit to, there was a concern about some development. I'm not saying we need to go through that right now, but I think it might be reasonable for us, Arthur, for us to follow up and just see.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, shall we adjourn?
Well,
What else we have?
we do have an opportunity for the council.
Oh.
Are you done with your manager's report?
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you want me to report on
Thank
the
you.
property or?
Let's talk offline.
Okay.
I think we just agree we'll follow up and
We'll
then
follow
maybe
up.
next
Yeah.
meeting we'll
Yeah.
go into detail, as long as the resident feels that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to say in terms of budget, just the savings that Michael has brought us, not insignificant, quite impressive. So it's been really a blessing to have Michael on board here. So thanks to him.
Thank you.
So as we come to a conclusion, my friends on the Zoom call, this is another opportunity. Oh,
Somebody has their hand up.
Yes, that's me.
yes.
Oh,
Andrew, I haven't spoken much, but I would like to have a chance to defend myself against the allegations, false of course, that were made about me, not only at several meetings over the last couple of months, but at the listening forum and again tonight. I'll try to keep it quick. I'll talk faster than some of our quick talkers. At the listening forum, it was stated that I have been found guilty of election interference, although I wasn't named. It was clear by inference, because I edited out a reference to the number of announced candidates in the weekly wrap up in the 2020 election while I was serving as fill-in staff during staff transition in the early days of the pandemic. Ron can confirm that he said this was not election interference, but before we came to that conclusion, I had gotten an email and a follow-up call from the election committee chair threatening me with a $1,000 fine, imprisonment for up to a year, or both. So I was clearly not guilty. However, due to many questionable actions by that same election committee chair, all candidates were informed of many improprieties that had occurred during the 2020 election and advised that the election could be contested. As far as I know, this had never happened before in VMA history. In the summer of 2020, the council determined that under the circumstances, because we didn't have an election code or any mechanism to deal with these, we'll call them irregularities on the part of the election committee chair, that we would essentially just keep it quiet, that we would hope that things would get better, and in the interest of preserving community harmony, there would be no public disclosures. That strategy, despite best intentions, has proven to be misguided at best. The mystery surrounding the inciting incidents of the 2020 election, which ultimately led to the realization of a burning, urgent need for an ethics ordinance that would cover impartiality, became the stuff of suburban legend, creating speculation, hindering council transparency while allowing some residents to spread disinformation virtually unchecked. Residents have a right to know the truth about the 2020 election and what actually led to the genesis, or what it was the genesis of the current election law. Interestingly, the people who are most opposed to it know fully well why it was created, and often profess innocence, but nevertheless, before anyone should suggest defamation actions, having been defamed nonstop, I can assure you that truth is a defense, and that I do have documents, and that I have been informed that those documents, which are public records, can be released. So I would hope that you all can knock it off now and try to adhere to truth in the future, if at all possible. You all talk about how it's so difficult to serve as a volunteer in this village. And Andrew is right. We do it despite the knowledge, or most of us are not afraid of the ethics code. What really is a detriment to public service is the bullying by and outright lying about facts by a number of residents. And I just hope that we can realize that's the true source of the schism in the village. And until people really understand what has brought this all about, it will probably not be resolved. And that's it. Done.
Something to Susan. Oh, Susan, can you hear me? Susan, can you hear?
I think you need to speak up, Katie.
Okay, Susan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say, I mean, I'm sorry if you felt attacked. I know, I am. And
good, thank you.
I just want to say that tonight, I literally tossed and turned. It was a game day decision on this ordinance. I kept going back and forth. And a lot of what I weighed was, I served as liaison before you this last year to the ethics committee. I found them to be a harmonious bunch. I enjoyed my time serving with them. I didn't feel like they were keeping dossiers on anyone. And I turned and tossed and turned on it. The only reason I voted against it was I just didn't think it was necessary at this time. That's all. But I want to apologize. I don't want anyone to feel attacked. And I do think you have been on the hot seat necessarily, and the hot seat's no fun. It's hot. And I just wanted to say that as I serve with you.
Thanks, Katie.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I think for many of us, clearly it was kind of a game day decision. I didn't see much harm in it, but others felt like it was much more harmful, but that doesn't go to what you just commented on. And we will all live happily ever after without this amendment, and we would have probably with it as well. But what's great about this council is there are no foregone conclusions when something's introduced. As has been the accusation in the past, where the voices of the residents were sometimes not heard, and or they felt like their voices were not heard. So I think we've really moved to change that quite a bit.
I mean, when it comes to the issue of volunteering, the number one reason I've heard people just say is they don't have the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, here we are.
there's a lot of people about volunteering.
Right. I think council members are told it takes it's an average 3-hour commitment or so a week, maybe
Not
a
true.
month.
It's never been true, really.
Yeah, well, I can tell you certainly as chair, it's not, that's for sure. All right, listen, we have hands up, and I think we're gonna conclude this evening. It's 11 o'clock with these three hands.
It's 3 o'clock in the UK.
That's right.
And thank you for that.
Thank
Susan.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
My pleasure.
Larry, I don't know if your hand is still up or is up again.
Yes,
So
it's up.
speak if you'd like to speak.
I'd like to speak. First thing I'm a little confused about is there was a comment about WSSC's involvement on the storm drains. What is Montgomery County doing? Department of Transportation? Are they doing anything?
So we'll have to research this and provide an update. It's been a while. He can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because WSSC is pretty much bankrupt, and Montgomery County, I thought, took over the storm drains. I know.
Okay, again, we'll provide an update once we have an update on the storm drain issue. I don't have that prepared right now, so.
Okay, well, just for your edification, they came here and replaced a portion of the storm drain. And it was the first time I ever saw the Montgomery County Department of Transportation do that in our village.
Okay.
And that occurred 2 years ago. The other comment I'd like to bring up is about, what are those, on traffic calming, what is it when you create like a peninsula sticking out from the curb? What is that called?
Curb extension.
Curb extension.
Curb extension.
Okay, if you would go to Club Drive, those of you who have a chance, and turn down there, you'll see that they put 5 curb extensions, whatever they're called, in there over a year ago. Throughout the summer, you will see that many of them grew with weeds. You'll see that many of the warning posts were broken down. And starting last week, you'll see that 4 of them now have signs saying, slow down, protect our pets and children. In other words, they don't work. So I just would like you to see that.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, no, Larry, totally agree with you. I'm one of those people that is probably at fault that those had to be put in because I cut through there. At times I do drive slowly, but they do have the signs up, drive here as if your kids lived here.
Yeah. It's,
But those are not our models, just to be clear, those are not the models that we would use in our.
and finally, they also take up parking, which we're desperate for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
The
thank
other
you,
thing
Larry.
is,
Oh, sorry.
I would ask that if council members want to feel that people are saying things about them and they want to defend themselves, I think that when you have council business done in a closed session, that you're ethically not allowed to discuss or comment or make innuendos about what occurred there. And if you do so, I think that's highly unethical. And that is something that I have seen you, Susan, do.
Oh,
The
wait,
other
no, that's not from a closed session. I'm
Excuse me,
talking
that's
about
right,
things that
excuse me,
occurred in actual.
Excuse me.
Sure,
The
I'll
next
talk to you
thing is,
later.
The other night, you implied that another council member had instructed the ethics committee members not to attend, and it was pure not true. So
No,
maybe
no,
you should
no.
follow if you don't want people making comments about you, maybe you should think twice about what you say about others.
And where does this closed session come from? What are you talking about? That wasn't a closed session. What I said was that there had been.
So you're saying everything that
request to
occurred in
create-
that situation, all that is public record, anyone can see it.
That what?
That the issue that you discussed where you feel you were maligned, if that all that's public record, I would like you to let me know how to see it, because I'd like
Oh,
to
just
see.
put in a Public Information Act request. That's what I'm saying. It's all public records. You can see them. You can see all the irregularities that occurred in the 2020 election. They're out there. I've talked to Ron about it. He said, just make sure there are no confidential or privileged documents, no
So
investigation.
you mean somebody's gone through the documents?
They haven't been compiled. I have them because I
Oh,
received them in the course of business.
Okay.
You know how that is, Larry. You've been a council member. You know this stuff.
I don't know why.
That's why I have them and they're available to any resident. You know that, MPIA requests.
I'll certainly file it, but I
Sure,
still
do
think,
that.
I still
Everybody
think
should.
that
I
you-
encourage
yeah,
it.
But your innuendos on other people are also uncalled for. Maybe you ought
No,
to clean
but-
up your own act.
But you're misstating what I said, so forget
Yeah,
it.
right. And that was also forced the council member to make a comment to you the other night, right? Because I'm misstating it.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Moving on, yeah.
Marty?
I'm muted. Thank you. Number one, thank you for the very careful and thorough discussion of the ethics ordinance, and thank you for voting not to extend it. I really appreciate that as a resident who feels affected by it. Second, I think that this has been an incredibly helpful meeting, albeit another very long one. I want to thank you for all your work and all your patience and all your care. Last and least, I reserve the right, since Susan referred to me indirectly as the committee chair in 2020, I reserve the right to respond to the statements she made, some of which are, in my view, not accurate. And there's documentation to show that they were not accurate. Among other things, she was never threatened with any legal penalties or fines. That was completely false. So let me just say that I would ask the council to inform me, tell me now, how you would like me to respond. I would like a written copy of her comments tonight. And of course, obviously, we'll follow your guidance as council on how you would like me to respond to that. I don't know what process you would like, but I'm happy to comply with whatever you say.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would.
To be discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Ron can comment. I don't know what you're under no obligation to respond to anything, Marty, but Ron, if you have comments to help guide this.
But before you do, if
Yeah.
I could just start the search, because Marty appears not to recall having sent me an email.
I remember the email, Susan, but
on
it didn't say what you said it said.
3/14/20. I'm sorry?
I said, I recall the email. As the committee chair, I was required to report anything that looked like election interference to our liaison. We didn't even know you were the one who had edited that announcement. So, let's be real clear here and let's get the documents on the
But
table.
you also threatened me in a phone call, but that.
No, I
email-
didn't.
That email, yeah, you did. And that email will suffice to show that that's what your intent was.
No, it wasn't, and it doesn't show that at all.
Whatever.
So I don't want to
Time
have
for
this
everyone to
argument
go to
now.
bed.
I'm asking the council to tell me how you would like me to
All right,
respond.
so let me just say this is not helpful.
Right.
So we can figure something out offline, but this is not.
I agree. I agree. This is not the
best
time or
way.
place. And I will follow your guidance on how you would like me to handle it.
Anything else, Marty, before I move on to Naomi?
Just a big thank you for a very long night and a lot of hard work on everybody's part. Really appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Marty.
Thanks, Mike.
Naomi?
You went to bed.
No, Naomi's here. You unmute yourself, Naomi, we can't hear you. Yeah.
I just want to ask, Susan, you made a remark earlier about the number of people who voted, who indicated on the community survey that they needed help with aging in place. And you made some remark about
I said that.
some of them voting more than once.
No,
Can you clarify that?
No, she did.
Susan is unmuted, but I'm not hearing her. So given that she's in the UK, maybe that was her final comment for the night. I'm not sure. Naomi, I'm sorry. We can go back to the recording. of
That
this meeting.
was an example of a snide remark that I do not appreciate. The other snide remark tonight was telling Jeff that was the first time he voted around an ethics issue. And that was not appreciated. So I just want to point out that these little things that are happening from that direction make me feel uncomfortable. And I would hope that it stops.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, I mean, preaching to the choir. I wanna in conclusion, just say this, that I so appreciate all the time and effort that went into both resident comments, resident outreach, resident coming and speaking at the listening forum, Lori, Mark, and Alex's hard work in answering some of the questions posed in this regard, the time they have spent to help educate what it means to apply this additional coverage on non-statutory committees. I think everyone has worked very hard to help elevate this discussion. I'm not speaking about the last 5 minutes, of course. So I really do appreciate that. I think we're all came here on this particular subject matter with the right intentions in speaking about what we thought would be best for this community. I'm happy with the outcome, even though I voted for it. I'm perfectly happy with the outcome. And I want to thank everyone for sticking around this late. And participating in this discussion in this open forum. So with that, I will ask if anyone would like to move to adjourn for tonight. Arthur is moving. Is there a second? Jeff is seconding. All in favor, say aye. Aye. I don't see Susan, but maybe close to unanimous. We are adjourned.
Good.
Thank you, Ron.
Turn off the recording.